The telegram crumpled in Clara's trembling hand as the Wyoming wind whipped her wedding dress around her legs. "Found someone else! Don't come!" 8 words that destroyed everything. Standing alone on that dusty Cheyenne platform in 1875, she had no idea that the man watching her from across the station would change her life forever. Welcome to a story of heartbreak, hope, and unexpected love in the American frontier. I invite you to follow my story to the end and comment your city below so I can see how far our tale has traveled. The train's whistle pierced the morning air as it rolled to a stop at Cheyenne Station, black smoke billowing into the crystal blue Wyoming sky. Clara Whitmore pressed her gloved hands against the window one last time, watching the unfamiliar landscape of sagebrush and distant mountains that would soon become her new home. Or so she had believed until 20 minutes ago. She stood slowly, her legs unsteady, the cream-colored silk of her wedding dress rustling against the narrow aisle. The other passengers had already begun gathering their belongings, eager to stretch their legs after the long journey from Boston. But Clara remained frozen, her fingers clutching the telegram that had been delivered to her by the conductor just as they'd crossed into Wyoming territory. "Miss..." The conductor appeared at her elbow, his weathered face creased with concern. "This is your stop, isn't it, Cheyenne?" Clara nodded mutely, forcing herself to move. She had sold everything she owned for this journey. Her mother's jewelry, her father's books, even the small inheritance from her grandmother, all converted to cash for a new life with James Morrison. The man who had courted her through letters for 8 months, who had sent her a tintype of himself standing proudly before his mercantile store, who had promised her a good life in the growing town of Cheyenne. "Found someone else. Don't come. J.M." 8 words. That's all her future had been worth to him. 8 words sent by telegraph when she was already 3/4 of the way across the country when turning back was impossible. The conductor helped her down the steep steps, her trunk and 2 carpet bags deposited unceremoniously on the wooden platform beside her. The autumn wind immediately attacked her carefully pinned hair, pulling blonde strands from the elaborate style she'd created that morning in anticipation of meeting James. She'd wanted to look perfect for him. She'd wanted him to see her step off that train and know he'd made the right choice. "You have someone meeting you, miss?" the conductor asked, glancing around the crowded platform with obvious doubt. "Yes," Clara lied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." He tipped his cap and climbed back aboard. Within minutes, the train was pulling away, leaving her standing there in her wedding dress. The dress she'd sewn herself over 3 months working by candlelight after long days at the Boston millinery shop where she'd been employed. Ivory silk with mother-of-pearl buttons down the back, delicate lace at the collar, and cuffs. She'd imagined James's face when he saw her in it. She'd imagined their wedding at the small church he'd described in his letters. The platform bustled with activity around her. Cowboys in dust-covered chaps, merchants hauling goods. Women in practical calico dresses that made her silk gown look absurdly out of place. A few people glanced at her curiously. A bride standing alone with her luggage was certainly an odd sight, but most hurried past absorbed in their own business. Clara's mind raced. She had $43 to her name. No return ticket. No family back in Boston who could help. Her parents had died in a cholera outbreak 3 years ago, leaving her truly alone. The few friends she'd had at the millinery had already forgotten her. She was sure replaced by some other girl willing to work 14-hour days for barely enough to cover room and board. "Ma'am." A young boy, perhaps 12, appeared at her elbow. "You need help with your bags. My pa runs the boarding house just down the street. Clean rooms, fair prices." Clara looked down at him, seeing the calculation in his eyes, as he took in her fine dress and leather trunk. She'd be charged double, maybe triple the usual rate. And $43 wouldn't last long even at fair prices. "Thank you, but no," she managed, attempting a smile that felt like it might crack her face. "I'm waiting for someone." The boy shrugged and darted off toward other potential customers. Clara sank onto her trunk, the weight of her situation crushing down on her. She was 24 years old, unmarried, alone in a frontier town where she knew no one, with barely enough money to survive a month. The kind of catastrophe that penny novels were written about, except this was real, and there would be no dashing hero to rescue her. The sun climbed higher the October morning, growing warm despite the wind. Her dress, designed for a Boston autumn, was far too heavy for this weather. Sweat gathered at the base of her neck, making her skin itch beneath the tight collar. She should move, should find somewhere to stay, should make some kind of plan, but she couldn't seem to make her legs work. "Sarah Margaret, you get back here this instant." The male voice, deep and exasperated, cut through Clara's misery. She looked up to see two small girls, perhaps 6 years old, racing through the crowd, their copper-colored braids flying behind them. They were identical. Same freckled faces, same mischievous grins, same dusty pinafores that suggested they'd been running wild all morning. "Can't catch us, Papa," one of them shouted, glancing back with obvious glee. They were heading straight for Clara. She barely had time to stand before they barreled into her, their small bodies hitting her skirts with enough force to send her stumbling backward. Her heel caught in the hem of her dress, and she felt herself falling. Strong hands caught her arms just before she hit the platform, steadying her. "I'm so sorry, ma'am." The voice belonged to the girl's father, and Clara found herself looking up into the darkest brown eyes she'd ever seen. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of deep tan that spoke of long days in the sun. His face was weathered but handsome, with sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw covered in a day's worth of stubble. She guessed he was perhaps 30, maybe a few years older. "Sarah Margaret," he said sternly, not taking his eyes off Clara's face. "Apologize to the lady immediately." The twins who had frozen at the collision looked up at Clara with wide eyes. "Sorry, ma'am," they said in unison, though neither looked particularly contrite. "We didn't mean to knock you," one added. "You just appeared right where we were running," the other explained, as if this somehow made it Clara's fault. The man sighed, releasing Clara's arms once he was sure she was steady. "I apologize for my daughters. They're a bit spirited." "It's quite all right," Clara heard herself say. Her voice sounded strange hollow. "No harm done." But the man was studying her now, taking in her wedding dress, her luggage, the obvious absence of anyone with her. His brow furrowed slightly. "Are you waiting for someone, ma'am?" The question so gently asked nearly undid her. Clara felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked rapidly, refusing to cry in front of strangers, especially not in front of this man with his kind eyes and his two motherless daughters. She could tell they were motherless by the way their hair was braided competent, but lacking a woman's touch, by the mismatched buttons on one girl's pinafore, by the way they ran wild without fear of maternal consequences. "I was," she said finally. "But it seems plans have changed." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by something that might have been anger, not at her, but at whoever had left her standing here alone. "Papa, can we go now?" one of the twins asked, tugging at his sleeve. "Mrs. Patterson said she'd have peppermint sticks if we came by the store today." "In a moment, Sarah." He didn't look away from Clara. "Ma'am, forgive me for being forward, but do you have arrangements, somewhere to stay?" Clara lifted her chin, pride warring with desperation. "I'll manage, thank you." "The boarding houses here," he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "They're not always suitable for a lady alone, especially one who's new to town. As I said, I'll manage." He studied her for another long moment, then seemed to come to some decision. "My name is Ethan Caldwell. I have a ranch about 5 miles outside of town." He paused, glancing down at his daughters, who were now engaged in a subtle shoving match. "I've been looking for a governess for the girls. The position includes room and board plus wages. It's honest work if you're interested." Clara stared at him. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you're educated. I can hear it in your voice. I know you're from back east, probably Boston from your accent. I know you're in need of employment and shelter. And I know my daughters need someone who can teach them to be ladies before they turn completely feral." He said this last part with a wry smile, ruffling one twin's hair affectionately. "Papa," the girl protested, ducking away from his hand. "Mr. Caldwell," Clara began, but he held up a hand. "I'm not expecting an answer right now, but if you're interested, we'll be in town for another 2 hours. We'll be at Patterson's general store, then the feed store. After that, we're heading back to the ranch." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a card. "This has the ranch's name and location in case you decide to accept. The offer stands for today." Clara took the card with numb fingers. "Caldwell Ranch, Snake River Valley." It read in simple print. "Can we go now?" the other twin asked, bouncing impatiently. Yes, Margaret, we can go. He tipped his hat to Clara. Ma'am. And then they were gone. The girls racing ahead again while their father followed at a more measured pace, occasionally calling out warnings about watching where they were going. Clara stood there holding the card, her mind reeling. A governess position. It was respectable work, better than what she might find in town, if she could find anything at all. But going to live on a ranch with a stranger and his children? Her mother would have been horrified at the very suggestion. Then again, her mother had also believed that James Morrison was a good match based solely on his letters and the recommendation of a distant cousin. Look how that had turned out. Clara picked up her carpet bags, leaving the trunk for now, and made her way into town. She needed to think, needed to weigh her options. The main street was bustling with activity. Wagons rolling past horses tied to hitching posts, people going about their business with the kind of purpose that made her feel even more adrift. She found a small cafe and ordered tea and toast, wincing at the prices. Even this simple meal would eat into her meager funds. As she sat at a corner table trying to make herself invisible, she overheard conversations from the other patrons. Third girl this month to leave the Sage Hen Saloon. Can't say I blame them the way Big Tom runs that place. Heard the widow Martinez is looking for help at her laundry, but the pay's barely enough to keep a bird alive. That new girl at the boarding house won't last long, too pretty for her own good in a town full of lonely cowboys. Each overheard fragment painted a bleaker picture of her prospects. Clara pulled out the card again, running her finger over the simple lettering. Ethan Caldwell hadn't looked at her the way the men at the station had, with calculation or hunger. He'd looked at her like she was a person in need of help, nothing more or less. But could she trust her judgment? She'd trusted James, after all. Clara paid for her meal and walked back toward the general store, telling herself she was just going to look to perhaps learn more about this Ethan Caldwell before making any decisions. The store was easy to find, the largest building on the main street with Patterson's General Store painted in bold letters across the front. Through the window, she could see the twins inside their noses pressed against a glass jar of candy. Their father stood nearby, talking to a middle-aged woman behind the counter. As Clara watched, one of the girls tugged on his sleeve, pointing at the candy. He shook his head, but when she made what was clearly a pleading face, he relented, holding up 2 fingers to the shopkeeper. It was such a simple domestic scene, a father indulging his daughters, but there was something about the way he interacted with them, firm but gentle, exasperated but loving, that made Clara's chest tighten. You thinking of taking Ethan up on his offer? Clara jumped spinning to find an elderly woman standing beside her, also looking through the window. I beg your pardon. The woman smiled, her face a map of wrinkles. Sorry, dear. Didn't mean to startle you. I'm Mrs. Patterson. My husband and I run the store. I saw Ethan talking to you at the station. Whole town's been wondering when he'd finally break down and hire help for those girls. He said he was looking for a governess, Clara said carefully. Mrs. Patterson snorted. That's one way to put it. Those 2 little hellions have run off 3 housekeepers in the past year. But a governess might be different, someone to teach them, not just chase after them. She studied Clara with sharp eyes. You're the bride who got thrown over, aren't you? Supposed to marry James Morrison? Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. How did you... Honey, in a town this size, everybody knows everybody's business. James came in here yesterday buying ribbons and fancy soap. For that saloon girl he's been courting, no doubt. Man has no shame. She patted Clara's arm. You're better off without him, though I know that's cold comfort right now. Clara's humiliation deepened. The whole town knew. Everyone she passed probably knew she was the rejected bride, the woman not good enough for James Morrison. Ethan's a good man, Mrs. Patterson continued, seemingly oblivious to Clara's distress. Lost his wife 3 years ago to scarlet fever. He's done his best with the girls, but they need a woman's influence. Ranch is prosperous too. He's not rich, but he's comfortable. Pays fair wages and treats his hands well. Why are you telling me this? Mrs. Patterson smiled. Because I can see you're considering it and you're scared. That's smart. A woman alone has to be careful. But I've known Ethan Caldwell for 5 years since he first came to Wyoming territory. He's honest, hardworking, and devoted to those girls. You could do a lot worse for a temporary situation while you figure out your next steps. Temporary? Yes, that's what it would be, just until she could save enough money to what return to Boston. Try another town. Thank you, Clara said quietly. Mrs. Patterson squeezed her arm. Whatever you decide, dear, don't let James Morrison's foolishness define your worth. Any man who'd throw over a lady like you for a saloon girl is the worst kind of fool. She bustled into the store, leaving Clara alone with her churning thoughts. Through the window, she watched Ethan Caldwell help his daughters choose penny candy, patient even when they changed their minds 3 times. One of the girls, Sarah or Margaret, she couldn't tell them apart, stood on her tiptoes to whisper something in his ear, and he laughed a rich, warm sound that Clara could hear even through the glass. She thought of the boarding houses, of trying to find work in town where everyone knew her shame. She thought of her $43 and how quickly it would disappear. She thought of those 2 wild little girls who clearly needed someone to teach them to care for them. Before she could lose her nerve, Clara pushed open the door and stepped inside. The store smelled of coffee and leather pickles and tobacco. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, packed with everything from bolts of fabric to sacks of flour. The twins were now by the pickle barrel, attempting to sneak tastes when they thought no one was looking. Ethan Caldwell noticed her immediately. His expression shifted from surprise to something that might have been hope. Miss... He paused, realizing they hadn't exchanged names properly. Whitmore, Clara supplied. Clara Whitmore. Miss Whitmore. He crossed to her, the girls trailing behind curiously. This is Sarah. He put his hand on one copper head, and Margaret. His hand moved to the other. How do you tell them apart? Clara asked, studying the identical faces. Sarah has a scar here. He touched his left eyebrow from when she fell out of the barn loft last summer, and Margaret is slightly taller, though she claims it's only because Sarah slouches. I do not slouch, Sarah protested. You're the lady whose dress we ruined, Margaret said, looking at Clara with renewed interest. It's very pretty. Are you getting married? Margaret, Ethan said warningly. What? She's wearing a wedding dress, Papa. It's a logical question. Clara felt that hollow sensation in her chest again. No, she said simply. I'm not getting married. Why not? Sarah asked. Sarah, Ethan's voice was sharp now. That's enough. Why don't you girls go look at the hair ribbons Mrs. Patterson has new ones in? They scampered off, though not without several backward glances. I apologize, Ethan said. They haven't quite learned about subjects that shouldn't be discussed. That's one of the things a governess would teach them, I suppose, Clara said, surprised by her own boldness. He smiled slightly. Among other things, reading, writing, arithmetic, proper manners, how to be young ladies instead of wild heathens. And what would my duties be exactly beyond teaching? Just teaching and watching over them. We have a cook and a housekeeper, though Mrs. Flores only comes 3 days a week. You'd have your own room, take meals with the family, Sundays off, and 1 afternoon a week to come to town if you need supplies or just want time away from the ranch. And the wages, $20 a month plus room and board. It was fair, even generous. More than she could hope to make at any position in town, especially with room and board included. Why me? She asked. You don't know if I'm qualified. You don't know anything about my character beyond the fact that I've been disappointed. Ethan was quiet for a moment, watching his daughters examine ribbons with the intensity of scholars studying ancient texts. My wife died 3 years ago, he said finally. Fever took her in less than a week. I know what it's like to have your life upended in an instant, to have to remake yourself when all you want to do is disappear. He looked back at her. You need a position. I need help with my daughters. It seems like Providence, doesn't it? Providence. Clara wanted to laugh. If this was Providence, God had a twisted sense of humor. Could I have a trial period? She asked. 2 weeks to see if it suits both parties. That's fair, Ethan agreed. When would you want to start? Clara thought of her trunk on the platform, her $43, the boarding houses with their thin walls and questionable safety. Today, if that's acceptable. Something shifted in his expression, relief perhaps. More than acceptable. We'll be leaving in about an hour. That should give you time to... He gestured vaguely at her dress. I have other clothes in my trunk, Clara said, then realized the presumption. That is, if you're certain. I'm certain, he called to his daughters. Sarah Margaret, come meet Miss Whitmore properly. She's going to be your new governess. The girls raced over ribbons, forgotten. Really? Margaret asked, her eyes wide. Does this mean we have to do lessons? Sarah asked, considerably less enthusiastic. Every day, Clara said, finding her first genuine smile since receiving the telegram. Reading, writing, arithmetic, geography, history, and deportment. What's deportment? Sarah asked suspiciously. How to behave like proper young ladies, Clara explained. The twins exchanged horrified looks. But we'll also read stories, Clara added quickly, and perhaps learn to draw and play music if you have an instrument. Mama's piano is in the parlor, Margaret said quietly. No one's played it since... She trailed off, and an awkward silence fell. Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Well, Clara said brightly, perhaps we can change that. Music is such a joy in a home. You play? Ethan asked. Adequately, though I'm better at teaching than performing. Sarah can't carry a tune in a bucket, Margaret announced. She sounds like a dying cat when she sings. Do not do too. Girls, Ethan said firmly, and they subsided, though they continued to glare at each other. He turned to Clara. I'll send my ranch hand Tom to collect your trunk. Where is it? Still at the station, I'm afraid? We'll get it. And Miss Whitmore? He paused. You might want to change before we leave. The ride to the ranch can be dusty. Clara looked down at her wedding dress. The beautiful, useless wedding dress that had cost her 3 months of work and all her romantic dreams. Yes, she said. I'll change. Mrs. Patterson, who had been pretending not to eavesdrop, bustled over. You can use my back room, dear. Much more private than anywhere else you'll find. Clara accepted gratefully, retrieving one of her carpet bags and following Mrs. Patterson to a small room behind the counter. As she unbuttoned the dozens of pearl buttons, each one sewn on with such hope and care, she felt like she was shedding more than just a dress. She was shedding the Clara who had believed in fairy tales, who had thought love could bloom through letters, who had trusted a man's promises. The Clara who emerged dressed in a simple blue calico work dress was someone new, someone who would have to be stronger, more practical, more careful with her heart. When she returned to the main store, the twins were outside with their packages, and Ethan was settling his account with Mr. Patterson. He looked up as she approached, and something flickered in his eyes. Approval, perhaps, or relief that she looked less like the abandoned bride and more like a governess. Ready? He asked. Clara thought of James probably at this very moment wooing his saloon girl with ribbons bought from this very store. She thought of the life she'd imagined. A small house in town, children of her own, a husband who came home to her each evening. Then she looked at Ethan Caldwell, weathered and steady, offering her not romance, but honest work. She looked at the 2 copper-haired girls pressing their noses against the window, already impatient to be off. Yes, she said, I'm ready. The wagon was practical rather than fancy. Sturdy wood with iron-reinforced wheels built for ranch work rather than comfort. Tom the ranch hand was a grizzled man in his 50s who touched his hat to Clara but said nothing as he helped her up to the bench seat. The twins clambered into the back among sacks of flour and other supplies. Ethan took the reins, and with a soft command to the horses, they were off rolling down Cheyenne's main street. Clara kept her eyes forward, but she could feel the stares of townspeople, could imagine their whispers. There goes the jilted bride riding off with Ethan Caldwell. What's that about? Let them wonder, she thought. Let them gossip. At least she wouldn't be around to hear it. The town gradually gave way to open prairie, vast stretches of grassland dotted with sagebrush and the occasional scrub oak. The mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks already touched with snow. It was beautiful in a raw, untamed way that was nothing like the gentle hills and forests of Massachusetts. How long have you been in Wyoming territory? Clara asked, mainly to break the silence that had settled over them. 5 years. Ethan replied, his eyes on the rutted road ahead. Came out from Missouri after the war, thought it would be a good place for a fresh start. And has it been? He glanced at her. In some ways. The land is good, the ranch is thriving. In others, he shrugged. Some things you can't outrun no matter how far you go. Clara understood that all too well. Papa, can we stop at the creek? Margaret called from the back. It's hot. We'll be home soon enough, Ethan replied. You can play in the creek behind the house all you want then. But the good swimming hole is here. No swimming today. Mrs. Flores is making her special tamales for dinner, and we don't want to be late. This successfully distracted the twins, who began discussing tamales with enthusiasm. Clara found herself relaxing slightly. Children she understood. She'd helped raise her younger cousins before they'd moved to California, had taught Sunday school at her church in Boston. Children were straightforward in their needs and affections, unlike adults with their complicated motivations and capacity for betrayal. Tell me about their education so far, Clara said. Can they read right? They know their letters and can read simple words. My wife started teaching them before He cleared his throat. I've tried to continue, but running the ranch doesn't leave much time for lessons. And they've had no formal schooling. There's a school in town, but it's a 5-mile ride each way. Too far for them to go daily, especially in winter. I've been hoping to find someone who could teach them at home. Have there been other governesses? You're the first. We've had housekeepers who were supposed to watch them, but watching and teaching are different things. A wry smile touched his lips. Besides, the girls can be a handful. Papa, we can hear you, Sarah protested. Good. Then you also heard me say you're a handful, and you'll try to behave better for Miss Whitmore. We always behave, Margaret said with dignity. Ethan snorted. Tell that to Mrs. Henderson, who quit after you put a frog in her washing basin. That was an accident, Sarah said. The frog jumped in on its own. All 6 frogs. Clara bit her lip to keep from laughing. 6. We were trying to see which one could jump the farthest, Margaret explained. It was a scientific experiment. I see, Clara said solemnly. And what did you learn from this experiment? The twins exchanged glances, clearly surprised by the question. That Mrs. Henderson doesn't like frogs, Sarah said finally. And that the spotted one jumps farthest, Margaret added. Valuable information indeed, Clara said, though perhaps next time we could conduct our experiments outside. See, she understands science, Margaret said to her father. Mrs. Henderson just screamed and threw her apron at us. The road wound through a valley following a creek lined with cottonwoods. Their leaves were turning gold, rustling in the breeze like nature's own currency. Clara had never seen such open space, such endless sky. It made her feel small and insignificant, but also strangely free. No one here cared that she'd been an orphan taking in sewing to survive, that she'd worked in a millinery shop, that she'd been desperate enough to accept a proposal from a man she'd never met. There, Ethan said, pointing ahead. That's the ranch. Clara leaned forward to look. The house sat on a slight rise, a 2-story structure of weathered wood with a wraparound porch and real glass windows that caught the afternoon sun. It was larger than she'd expected, solid and well-maintained. Behind it were a barn, several outbuildings, and a corral where horses moved in the late afternoon light. Beyond that, fenced pastures stretched toward the mountains dotted with cattle. It's beautiful, Clara said, meaning it. It's home, Ethan said simply, but she heard the pride in his voice. As they rolled up the drive, a woman emerged from the house, short and round with graying hair pulled back in a bun and a flour-dusted apron. This must be Mrs. Flores, the cook. Señor Ethan, you're back just in time. The tamales are almost ready. And she stopped, noticing Clara. ¿Y quién es esta? Mrs. Flores, this is Miss Whitmore. She's going to be the girls' governess. Miss Whitmore, this is Mrs. Flores. She's been with us since we arrived in Wyoming, and she makes the best food in the territory. Mrs. Flores beamed at the compliment, then studied Clara with sharp brown eyes. You're too skinny, she announced. But we'll fix that. You like tamales. I've never had them, Clara admitted. Mrs. Flores looked scandalized. Never had tamales. Dios mío, tonight you eat. Tomorrow I teach you to make them. A woman should know how to cook. I know how to cook, Clara said, slightly defensively. Eastern cooking, Mrs. Flores said dismissively. All bland soup and dry bread. Here we use spices, flavor, you'll see. The twins had already jumped from the wagon and were racing toward the barn, presumably to check on some animal or another. Ethan helped Clara down, his hands firm and impersonal at her waist. "Let me show you to your room, Motitet," he said. "You can get settled before dinner." The house was even nicer inside than out. The front door opened onto a wide hallway with polished wood floors and a staircase leading to the second floor. To the left was a parlor with comfortable-looking furniture and indeed a piano in the corner, its surface dusty from disuse. To the right appeared to be Ethan's study, glimpsed through a partially open door. "Kitchen and dining room are toward the back," Ethan explained as he led her upstairs. "The girls' room is here," he indicated a door covered in pencil drawings of horses, "and your room is next door, close enough to hear if they need something in the night, but you'll have your privacy." He opened the door to reveal a pleasant room with a brass bed, a wardrobe, a small writing desk by the window, and a washstand with a blue and white pitcher. The window looked out over the back of the property, where she could see a vegetable garden and what appeared to be a chicken coop. "It's lovely," Clara said. "Thank you. Tom should be here with your trunk soon. Dinner's usually at 6, about an hour from now. The girls should wash up beforehand, though getting them to do so is sometimes a battle." "I'll manage," Clara said with more confidence than she felt. Ethan paused at the door. "Miss Whitmore." "Clara, I know this isn't what you planned. I know you've had a difficult day, but I want you to know that you're safe here. This is honest work and you'll be treated with respect. I promise you that." The kindness in his voice almost undid her. She'd been holding herself together through sheer will, but compassion was harder to bear than hardship. "Thank you," she managed. "I appreciate that." He nodded and left, closing the door softly behind him. Clara sank onto the bed, finally allowing herself a moment of weakness. This morning she'd awakened on the train, her stomach full of butterflies, imagining her reunion with James. She'd pictured him waiting at the station, perhaps with flowers. She'd imagined their wedding night, the life they'd build together. Instead, she was sitting in a stranger's house, preparing to become a governess to 2 wild children, her wedding dress packed away in a trunk like a relic of someone else's life. A knock at the door interrupted her melancholy. "Miss Whitmore." It was one of the twins. She couldn't tell their voices apart yet. "Papa says your trunk is here." Clara opened the door to find both girls standing there, vibrating with curiosity. "Tom brought it up," Margaret said. "It's heavy." "What's in it?" "Books, mostly," Clara said. "And clothes." "Books?" Sarah's nose wrinkled. "Why would you bring books?" "Because I like to read, and because you're going to need them for your lessons." Both girls groaned. "Do we have to start lessons tomorrow?" Margaret asked. "Not tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll get to know each other. I need to understand what you already know before I can teach you properly." Clara studied them. "But right now you both need to wash up for dinner." "We're not that dirty," Sarah protested, holding up hands that were, in fact, quite filthy. "You have dirt under your fingernails and what appears to be hay in your hair. What were you doing in the barn?" "Checking on Buttercup," Margaret said. "She's our cow. She's going to have a calf soon." "How exciting." "You can tell me all about it at dinner, after you wash." The girls trudged off to their room, and Clara could hear water splashing and continued protests about the necessity of cleanliness. She unpacked quickly, hanging her dresses in the wardrobe, placing her few books on the desk. At the very bottom of the trunk, wrapped in tissue paper, was her wedding dress. She stared at it for a long moment, then rewrapped it and placed it at the back of the wardrobe. She couldn't bear to look at it, but she couldn't bear to throw it away either. It had cost too much. Not just money, but hope. Dinner was an experience. The tamales were indeed delicious, corn masa filled with spiced pork wrapped in corn husks and steamed. Mrs. Flores had also prepared beans, rice, and a salad of tomatoes and peppers from the garden. The twins chattered throughout the meal, telling Clara about every animal on the ranch, their favorite hiding spots. The time Sarah fell in the creek and had to walk home soaking wet. Ethan ate quietly occasionally, correcting the girls' table manners or redirecting their more outlandish stories. Clara found herself stealing glances at him, trying to understand this man who had offered her sanctuary. He was handsome in a rugged way, but there was a sadness around his eyes, a weight to his shoulders that spoke of burdens carried too long alone. "Tell Miss Whitmore about Mama's piano," Margaret said suddenly, and the table went quiet. "Margaret, Ethan said warningly. What she said she could play. Maybe she could teach us. Mama always said she would when we were older. Clara saw the pain flash across Ethan's face before he schooled his expression. Your mother was very talented, he said quietly. She could make that piano sing. She played every evening after dinner, Sarah added. Papa would sit in his chair and smoke his pipe, and we'd sit on the floor by her feet. That sounds lovely, Clara said gently. We haven't touched it since she died, Margaret said matter-of-factly. Papa had it tuned last year, but no one plays it. Well, Clara said, trying to lighten the suddenly heavy atmosphere. Perhaps we can change that. Music is meant to be shared, after all. Would you play something tonight? Sarah asked eagerly. Clara glanced at Ethan, seeking permission. He hesitated, then nodded slightly. After dinner, they moved to the parlor. Clara lifted the piano's lid, running her fingers over the keys. It was a beautiful instrument, well-crafted, and, as Margaret had said, recently tuned. She sat on the bench, aware of the family arranged behind her. The twins on the floor, Ethan in what was clearly his usual chair. She began with something simple, a Bach invention that her own teacher had drilled into her years ago. Her fingers remembered the patterns, the rise and fall of the melody. Then, warming to the instrument, she moved into a piece by Chopin, one of the nocturnes that had always made her think of starlight on water. When she finished and turned around, she found Margaret in tears. "Oh, sweetheart," Clara said, immediately moving to kneel beside the girl. "I didn't mean to upset you." "It's just—" Margaret wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "It sounds different from when Mama played, but also right. Like the piano is happy again." Sarah put her arm around her sister. "Mama would like her," she said to her father. "She wouldn't want the piano to be sad and quiet." Ethan's expression was unreadable. "It's getting late. Time for bed." The girls protested, but eventually allowed themselves to be herded upstairs. Clara helped them into their nightgowns, braided their hair for sleep, and listened to their prayers, simple recitations that ended with "God bless Papa and Mrs. Flores and Tom and all the animals and Miss Whitmore." When she came back downstairs, Ethan was standing on the porch, looking out at the darkening sky. She hesitated, then joined him. "Thank you," he said without looking at her, "for playing. I didn't realize how much I missed hearing music in the house." "It must be difficult," Clara said carefully. "Raising them alone. Seeing reminders of your wife everywhere. Elizabeth was the light of this house. When she died, it was like all the color drained out of the world. I've done my best with the girls, but they need more than I can give them. They're wonderful children, spirited, yes, but bright and loving. They're like their mother that way, always finding joy in things even when life is hard." He finally looked at her. "What about you? Do you have family wondering where you are?" "No, my parents died 3 years ago. No siblings, a few cousins in California, but we're not close." "So you came out here alone on the promise of marriage." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. It seemed like a good opportunity at the time. James, Mr. Morrison, wrote lovely letters. He seemed sincere. "He's a fool," Ethan said bluntly. "Any man who would— well, you're better off." "So everyone keeps telling me." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. The night sounds of the ranch settled around them. Horses nickering in the corral, an owl calling from the cottonwoods, the distant lowing of cattle. "I should tell you," Ethan said eventually. "The girls haven't had an easy time of it. After their mother died, they were angry, confused. They acted out, pushed boundaries. They're better now, but they still have their moments. They might test you. All children test their teachers. It's how they learn what's expected of them." "You sound experienced." "I taught Sunday school back in Boston and helped raise my younger cousins before they moved away. Children are uncomplicated in their needs. They want love, attention, and clear boundaries. Adults are much more difficult." "Yes," Ethan agreed quietly. "They are." That night, Clara lay in the unfamiliar bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch. 24 hours ago, she'd been on a train full of hope. Now she was a governess responsible for 2 motherless girls and working for a man still grieving his wife. She thought of James, wondered if he was with his saloon girl right now. Did he ever think of her? Did he feel guilty for what he'd done? Or had she been so insignificant that he'd already forgotten her entirely? It didn't matter, she told herself firmly. James Morrison was her past. The ranch, the girls, this new life. That was her future, at least for now. Tomorrow she would begin teaching Sarah and Margaret. She would earn her wages, save her money, and figure out what came next. She would survive this just as she'd survived her parents' deaths, just as she'd survived poverty and loneliness and a dozen other heartbreaks. She was stronger than she'd known. She had to be. The first week passed in a blur of adjustment and small victories. Clara woke each morning to the sound of roosters crowing and the distant lowing of cattle, so different from the urban cacophony of Boston. She established a routine quickly. Breakfast with the family at 6:30, lessons from 8 to noon lunch, then afternoon activities that combined education with the practical needs of ranch life. The twins, as Ethan had warned, tested her boundaries immediately. On her second day, they hid all the primers she'd unpacked, claiming a mysterious wind must have blown them away. Clara found them stuffed behind the chicken coop after making the girls search for an hour in the hot sun. Their punishment was copying a full page of letters, which they did with dramatic sighs and frequent complaints of cramping hands. "My fingers are going to fall off," Sarah moaned, shaking her hand theatrically. "Then you'll have to learn to write with your toes," Clara replied calmly, not looking up from her mending, "though I imagine that would take even longer." Margaret giggled despite herself, then quickly covered it with a cough when Sarah glared at her. But for every moment of rebellion, there were two of breakthrough. Margaret, it turned out, had a natural aptitude for mathematics, solving problems with an intuitive understanding that surprised even Clara. Sarah struggled with numbers but devoured stories, reading aloud with expression that brought characters to life. "You could be an actress," Clara told her after a particularly animated reading of Robinson Crusoe. Sarah's face lit up. "Really? Papa says actresses are not respectable." "Some aren't," Clara agreed carefully, "but others perform Shakespeare and other great works. There's nothing disreputable about bringing art to life." She caught Ethan watching from the doorway during that exchange, his expression unreadable. He'd been doing that more often, appearing during lessons ostensibly to retrieve something from the parlor or check on the girls' progress, but lingering longer than necessary. "How are they doing?" he asked one evening after the girls had gone to bed. They'd fallen into a pattern of sitting on the porch after dinner watching the sunset behind the mountains while nursing cups of coffee. "Better than I expected," Clara admitted. "They're bright, both of them. They just need direction." "And discipline," Ethan added wryly. "Something I've been too lenient about. You've done the best you could under the circumstances. Being both father and mother isn't easy." "No," he agreed quietly. "It's not." The silence stretched between them, comfortable now, in a way it hadn't been that first night. Clara had learned that Ethan was a man of few words, but his silences weren't empty. They were full of thought, of careful consideration. "Tell me about Boston," he said suddenly. "What was your life there?" Clara was surprised by the personal question. Their conversations usually centered on the girls or the ranch operations. "It was different," she said finally. "Crowded, noisy. I worked at a millinery shop on Washington Street making hats for wealthy ladies who changed them with the seasons." "Did you enjoy it?" "The work itself, yes. Creating something beautiful from raw materials, seeing a design come to life. But the hours were long, and the pay was barely enough to live on. After my parents died, I had to take a room in a boarding house with 3 other girls. We took turns sleeping in the 2 beds. Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's no way to live." "It was survival," Clara said simply. "When James's first letter came through my church's correspondence program, it seemed like a miracle, a chance for a real life, a home of my own." "How long did you correspond?" "But 8 months. He wrote beautiful letters full of descriptions of Wyoming, of the life we'd build together. He said he was tired of being alone, that he wanted a wife who was educated and refined." She laughed bitterly. "I suppose I should have wondered why such a successful merchant couldn't find a wife locally." "Morrison's always been a smooth talker," Ethan said with evident disgust. "Came to town 2 years ago with grand plans and enough charm to convince people to invest in his schemes. The mercantile does well enough, but the man himself—" He shook his head. "You're well rid of him." "So everyone says." Clara pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The evening had grown cool autumn, asserting itself more strongly each day. But it still stings. The humiliation of it. standing there in my wedding dress like a fool while the whole town knew I'd been rejected. The only fool was Morrison. Ethan's voice was firm. Any man who would choose a saloon girl over a woman like you— He stopped abruptly, color rising in his cheeks. That is, you're obviously educated and refined, exactly what he claimed to want. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, quickly followed by alarm. She couldn't afford to develop feelings for her employer, especially one still mourning his wife. This position was temporary just until she could save enough to figure out her next step. I should check on the girls, she said, standing abruptly. Ethan stood as well. Miss Whitmore, Clara, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. You didn't, she lied. It's just late and tomorrow we're starting geography. I need to review my materials. He nodded, but she could see he wasn't convinced. Still, he let her go and she retreated to her room with her heart beating too fast. The next morning brought drama in the form of Mrs. Henderson, the woman whose washing basin had been invaded by frogs. She arrived just as lessons were beginning, her thin face pinched with disapproval. I've come to see how you're managing, she announced, though her tone suggested she expected to find chaos. We're doing quite well, thank you, Clara replied politely. Would you like to observe our geography lesson? Mrs. Henderson settled herself in the corner like a disapproving crow watching with eagle eyes as Clara unrolled a map of the United States. Now, girls, can you show me where Wyoming territory is? Both twins pointed correctly, and Clara smiled. Excellent. And where is Boston, where I came from? Sarah traced her finger across to Massachusetts. That's very far, she said. How many days did it take on the train? 5 days with several stops. I wouldn't want to be on a train that long, Margaret said. I'd get restless. Like you do in church, Sarah added, earning an elbow from her sister. Girls, Clara said mildly. Now let's talk about the state borders. Wyoming is seeking statehood, which means we might become a real state soon, Margaret interrupted excitedly. Papa says we might even get to vote on it. Women can't vote, Mrs. Henderson interjected sharply, and it's foolish to fill their heads with such notions. Clara felt her spine stiffen. Actually, Mrs. Henderson Wyoming Territory granted women the right to vote in 1869. We've had that right here for 6 years. The older woman's face flushed, an aberration that will surely be corrected when proper statehood is achieved. I think it's wonderful, Sarah said loyally. Why shouldn't ladies vote? We're just as smart as men. Sometimes smarter, Margaret added, glancing slyly at Mrs. Henderson. That's enough, Clara said, though she was secretly pleased. Let's return to our geography. Mrs. Henderson, thank you for stopping by, but I'm afraid we need to concentrate on our lessons now. It was a dismissal politely worded, but firm, Mrs. Henderson stood her mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. Well, she said finally, I can see you have things in hand. She swept out her skirts, rustling with indignation. As soon as the door closed, both girls burst into giggles. Did you see her face? Sarah gasped. Like she'd swallowed a lemon. She looked like our old rooster when he's angry, Margaret added. Clara tried to maintain her stern teacher expression, but failed a smile tugging at her lips. That was unkind, why, she said without much conviction. But also you both defended women's suffrage beautifully. I'm proud of you. Mama believed in suffrage, Margaret said matter-of-factly. She said women had just as much right to shape the future as men. Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was, Sarah agreed. Papa says we take after her. That evening at dinner, Ethan mentioned Mrs. Henderson's visit. She stopped by the feed store to inform me that you're filling my daughter's heads with radical notions. Clara's stomach dropped. Mr. Caldwell, I told her that's exactly what I hired you for. He continued, a slight smile playing at his lips. She was not pleased. Papa told her to mind her own business, Sarah reported gleefully, but he used bigger words. I suggested she focus on her own household, Ethan corrected, though perhaps less diplomatically than that. Mrs. Flores, serving the evening stew, chuckled. That woman's been trying to run everyone's life since she arrived in town. About time someone told her off. The girls defended women's suffrage quite eloquently, Clara said. You should be proud. I am. Ethan's eyes met hers across the table. Their mother would be too. After dinner, Clara played the piano again. It had become a nightly tradition, one the girls begged for if she tried to skip it. Tonight she chose lighter pieces, a waltz that made Margaret pretend to dance with an invisible partner, a lively folk tune that had Sarah clapping along. Play the pretty one, Margaret requested, the one that sounds like stars. Clara knew she meant the Chopin Nocturne. As her fingers found the familiar notes, she noticed Ethan had moved from his usual chair to stand by the window, his back to the room. The lamplight caught his profile, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the slight furrow between his brows. When she finished, he didn't turn around immediately. Elizabeth loved that piece, he said quietly. She played it the night I proposed to her. The girls had gone very still, watching their father with worried eyes. Clara could see they were afraid of his sadness, afraid of disrupting this fragile moment. Tell us about it, Papa, Margaret said softly. About how you proposed. Ethan turned his expression gentler than Clara had seen it. You've heard this story a dozen times. But Miss Whitmore hasn't, Sarah pointed out. He looked at Clara, seeming to ask permission. She nodded slightly. It was at a harvest dance in Missouri. He began settling back into his chair. Your mother was the prettiest girl there, and every man wanted to dance with her. But she kept turning them down, sitting by that old piano they had in the barn, playing when the regular musician needed a break. Because she was waiting for you, Margaret said, clearly knowing this story by heart. I'd like to think so. I finally got up the courage to ask her to dance, but she said she'd rather play. So I sat next to her on that piano bench while she played song after song. When everyone else had gone home and it was just us and the stars showing through the gaps in the barn roof, she played that Chopin piece. He paused, lost in memory. When she finished, I asked her to marry me. Didn't even have a ring yet, just blurted it out like a fool. And she said yes, Sarah finished triumphantly. She said yes, Ethan confirmed. Said she'd been waiting for me to ask since the first time she saw me. That's beautiful, Clara said softly. Ethan seemed to shake himself back to the present. It's late. Bedtime, girls. They protested, but obeyed, each kissing their father's cheek before heading upstairs. Clara rose to follow them, but Ethan caught her arm gently. Thank you, he said, for letting me tell that story, for making the piano sing again without making it feel like a betrayal. It's not a betrayal to live Mr. Caldwell, Clara said carefully. Your wife would want this house filled with music and laughter. Ethan, he said. Please call me Ethan. Mr. Caldwell makes me feel ancient. Ethan. She repeated the name, feeling strange and intimate on her tongue. He released her arm and she hurried upstairs, her skin still tingling where he'd touched her. 2 weeks passed, then 3. Clara's initial trial period came and went without either of them mentioning it. She'd settled into the rhythm of ranch life, learning to appreciate the vast skies and endless horizons that had initially made her feel so small. The girls were thriving under her tutelage, their quick minds absorbing lessons like sponges. One afternoon, while the twins were practicing their penmanship, Tom burst into the house. Boss, Bob, he called. We got trouble. Buttercup's trying to calve, but something's wrong. Ethan, who'd been working on ledgers in his study, emerged immediately. How long to... Been at it for 2 hours. The calf's stuck. Without hesitation, Ethan headed for the door. The girls jumped up, abandoning their work. Can we help, Papa? Sarah asked. No, you stay here with Miss Whitmore. But Clara was already reaching for her shawl. Actually, this could be educational. Birth is a natural part of ranch life. Ethan looked skeptical. It might not go well. Then they'll learn that too. Life isn't always pretty or easy. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. Stay back unless I tell you otherwise. They hurried to the barn where Buttercup was indeed in distress. The cow was lying on her side, breathing heavily, her eyes rolling. Clara could see the calf's front hooves emerging, but nothing else. The head's turned back, Ethan said after a quick examination. He stripped off his shirt without ceremony, revealing a broad chest marked with the scars of a lifetime of physical work. Tom, hold her head. I need to turn the calf. Clara pulled the girls back as Ethan worked his face set in concentration. She watched his muscles strain as he carefully maneuvered, talking soothingly to Buttercup all the while. "Is Buttercup going to die?" Margaret whispered, tears in her eyes. "Your father knows what he's doing," Clara said, though her own heart was racing. Long minutes passed, then suddenly Ethan gave a triumphant grunt. "Got it. Head's in position. Come on, girl, one more push." Buttercup bellowed, and suddenly the calf slid out in a rush of fluid and blood. The girls gasped. The calf lay still, covered in membrane. "Is it dead?" Sarah asked in a small voice. Ethan quickly cleared the calf's nose and mouth, then rubbed its sides vigorously with straw. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the calf sneezed, shook its head, and let out a weak bleat. "It's alive!" Margaret cheered. "She's alive," Ethan corrected, grinning. "You've got a heifer, girls." Buttercup, exhausted but alert, now turned to inspect her baby. Within minutes, she was licking the calf clean, her rough tongue stimulating the little one to try standing on wobbly legs. "Can we name her?" Sarah asked. "What do you think, Miss Whitmore?" Ethan asked, still kneeling by the cow and calf. "Should they name her?" Clara was struck by the sight of him, shirtless, covered in sweat and birth fluids, but radiating a quiet competence and gentleness that made her chest tight. "I think that would be wonderful," she managed. "Rosie," Margaret said immediately, "because she was born in October and the roses in Mama's garden always bloomed late." "Rosie it is," Ethan agreed. He stood suddenly, seeming to remember his state of undress. "I should clean up." He grabbed his shirt and headed for the pump outside. Clara tried not to watch as he washed water streaming down his chest, but her eyes seemed to have a will of their own. "Miss Whitmore's face is all red," Sarah observed innocently. "It's warm in here," Clara said quickly. "Let's give Buttercup and Rosie some peace. You can visit them later." That evening, the girls could talk of nothing but the calf. They recounted the birth dramatically to Mrs. Flores, who nodded and made appropriately impressed noises, even though she'd probably seen dozens of calves born. "You didn't faint," Ethan said to Clara after dinner as they sat on the porch. "Many ladies would have." "I'm not that delicate," Clara replied. "Death and birth are part of life. The girls need to understand that." "You'd make a good rancher's wife," he said, then immediately stiffened. "I mean, you adapt well to ranch life. Not that I wasn't suggesting." "I understand," Clara said, though her heart was racing. "Thank you. For the compliment, I mean." They lapsed into awkward silence. Finally, Ethan stood. "I should check on Buttercup one more time." He fled, leaving Clara alone with her tumultuous thoughts. She couldn't be developing feelings for him. She couldn't. She was his employee, nothing more. And he was still grieving his wife still wearing his wedding ring. Any attraction she felt was just loneliness and proximity, nothing more. But that night she dreamed of strong hands, gentle enough to deliver a calf, and brown eyes that looked at her like she was something precious. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Clara was teaching the girls about the American Revolution when she heard horses approaching. Through the window she saw a well-dressed man dismounting from a fine bay horse. Her stomach dropped as she recognized him. James Morrison. He looked exactly as his tintype had portrayed, handsome in a polished way with carefully groomed blonde hair and a mustache waxed to perfection. He wore a city suit despite the ranch setting his boots shining with polish that wouldn't last 5 minutes in the barn. "Girls, continue reading," Clara said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "I need to speak with someone." She stepped onto the porch just as James was approaching the door. His face lit up when he saw her, though she noticed his eyes traveled down her simple calico dress with something like disappointment. "Clara, my dear, I've been looking everywhere for you. Have you—" Her voice was cold. "How strange, considering your telegram told me not to come." He had the grace to look ashamed. "That was a terrible mistake. I was confused, temporarily swayed by— Well, it doesn't matter. I've come to make things right." "There's nothing to make right, Mr. Morrison. You ended our engagement before it began. We have no connection." "But we do." He stepped closer, and she could smell his cologne, too heavy, too sweet. 8 months of letters, Clara. Surely that means something. "It meant something until you threw it away for a saloon girl. His face flushed. That's over. A moment of madness, nothing more. You're the one I want to marry, the respectable wife I need for my business. How flattering, Clara said dryly. To be wanted for my respectability. You know what I mean. You're educated, refined. You'd be an asset to my business, a proper hostess for important dinners. We could have a good life together. Clara stared at him. This man she'd thought she loved. Had she really not seen the calculation in his letters? The way he'd evaluated her like merchandise. What's going on here? Ethan's voice came from behind James, who spun around. Ethan stood there with Tom, both men dusty from working cattle, but there was something dangerous in Ethan's stance. Caldwell, James said with obvious distaste. I've come to speak with my fiancée. Your former fiancée, Clara corrected sharply, and current governess to Mr. Caldwell's children. Governess. James's voice dripped condescension. Clara, surely you're not serious, working as a servant. It's honest work, Ethan said, stepping closer. More than can be said for some of your business dealings, Morrison. James's face reddened. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Now, Miss Whitmore has made it clear she doesn't want to speak with you. I think you should leave. Clara, James said, ignoring Ethan. Be sensible. You can't actually prefer this situation to marriage with me, living in this rough place tending to another woman's children. These children are delightful, Clara interrupted, and this rough place has shown me more genuine kindness in 3 weeks than you showed me in 8 months of letters. Papa? Sarah's voice came from the doorway. Both girls stood there looking worried. Is everything all right? Everything's fine, Ethan assured them. Mr. Morrison was just leaving. James looked at the girls, then back at Clara. You're making a mistake. When you come to your senses, you know where to find me, but I won't wait forever. Then don't wait at all, Clara said. Goodbye, Mr. Morrison. He mounted his horse stiffly and rode off without another word. Clara found herself trembling now that the confrontation was over. Are you all right? Ethan asked softly. Was that the man who was supposed to marry you? Margaret asked. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. He looks like a weasel, Sarah announced, all pointy and sneaky. Despite everything, Clara laughed. That's not polite, Sarah. But accurate, Ethan said. Girls, go finish your lessons. I need to speak with Miss Whitmore. They obeyed, reluctantly casting curious glances back. Ethan guided Clara to the porch steps, encouraging her to sit. You're shaking, he observed. I'm angry, Clara admitted. How dare he come here and act like I should be grateful for his change of mind, like I'm merchandise. He can return to the store and reclaim when he decides he wants it after all. You handled him well. I wanted to throw something at him, Clara confessed. Preferably something heavy. Ethan chuckled. I would have enjoyed seeing that. He paused. You know you don't have to worry about him bothering you again. If he comes back, I'll deal with him. I can fight my own battles. I know you can, but you don't have to fight them alone. Their eyes met and held. Something passed between them, something that made Clara's breath catch. Then Ethan stood abruptly. I should get back to work. The girls have probably destroyed the parlor by now. Clara found them exactly where they'd been told to stay, though they immediately bombarded her with questions about James. She answered honestly, but simply. He was a man who hadn't kept his promises, and she was better off without him. Good, Margaret said firmly. We don't want you to marry him and leave. You're ours now, Sarah added possessively. Clara's heart squeezed. Let's return to our lessons, shall we? But she couldn't concentrate on the American Revolution. Her mind kept returning to Ethan's words. You don't have to fight them alone. When had anyone ever offered to stand beside her in a fight? When had she ever felt less alone than she did on this ranch, with these girls and their quietly protective father? That night, after the girls were asleep, Clara found Ethan in his study, working on his ledgers by lamplight. She knocked softly on the doorframe. Come in, he said, looking up. Is everything all right? I wanted to thank you for today, for standing up to James. You don't need to thank me. He set down his pen. Morrison's a bully who's used to getting his way. Someone needed to show him he couldn't push you around. Still, it meant a lot. She hesitated. My trial period is over. Ethan went very still. Are you leaving? Do you want me to stay? The girls would be devastated if you left. He paused. And I've gotten used to having you here. The house feels more like a home again. Then I'll stay. For as long as you need me. Something flickered in his eyes. And if that's a very long time, Clara's pulse quickened. Then I'll be here a very long time. They looked at each other across the lamplit study, the air thick with unspoken possibilities. Then Clara stepped back. Good night, Ethan. Good night, Clara. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Clara realized she'd made a decision about more than just employment. Somewhere between that first piano lesson and watching Ethan deliver a calf between teaching the girls and standing up to James, she'd begun to fall in love. It was terrifying and exhilarating and probably foolish. But as she looked out her window at the vast Wyoming sky, studded with more stars than she'd ever seen in Boston, Clara thought that maybe, just maybe, she'd found where she belonged. The November wind howled through the valley, bringing with it the first real snow of the season. Clara woke to find the world transformed. Everything blanketed in pristine white that glittered in the early morning sun. She dressed quickly in her warmest dress and wool stockings, wrapping her shawl tight around her shoulders before venturing downstairs. The house was quieter than usual. She found Mrs. Flores in the kitchen kneading bread dough with practiced efficiency. "Where is everyone?" Clara asked, pouring herself coffee from the pot on the stove. Senor Ethan and Tom went to check the cattle before dawn. This snow came early. They need to move the herd to the winter pasture. Mrs. Flores's face was creased with worry. The girls are still sleeping. Let them rest. Their papa might need help later. Clara nodded, understanding the unspoken concern. Early snow could be dangerous for cattle caught in the wrong pasture, and moving a herd in these conditions was treacherous work. She tried not to think about Ethan out in the cold, tried not to worry about the 1,000 things that could go wrong. She busied herself with lesson preparation, but her mind kept wandering to the window, watching for any sign of the men returning. The twins came down around 8, excited about the snow, but subdued when they learned their father was still out with the herd. "Is Papa going to be all right?" Margaret asked, pushing her breakfast around her plate. "Your father knows this land better than anyone," Clara assured her. "He'll be fine." "Mama always worried when it snowed early," Sarah said quietly. "She said the weather could turn mean without warning." Clara reached across the table to squeeze both girls' hands. "How about we make something special for when he comes home, something to warm him up?" The girls perked up slightly. "Mama's apple pie," Margaret suggested hopefully. Clara hesitated. She'd never made Elizabeth Caldwell's apple pie, didn't even know if she could find the recipe. But the hope in the girl's eyes decided her. "Do you know where her recipe book is?" The twins led her to a shelf in the pantry where a worn notebook sat covered in dust. Clara opened it carefully, finding pages of recipes written in an elegant hand. Elizabeth Caldwell had been meticulous, noting not just ingredients but memories. Ethan's favorite, "Girls love this at Christmas," perfect for summer picnics. Clara's throat tightened as she realized she was holding a piece of this family's history, the domestic legacy of a woman who'd expected to have decades more to cook for her loved ones. "This one," Sarah said, pointing to a page marked "Apple Pie, Harvest Festival, Winter, 1872. They spent the morning cooking, the kitchen warming with the scent of cinnamon and baking apples. The girls helped peeling apples and rolling dough flour, ending up in their hair and on their noses. It was past noon when they heard horses approaching. Both girls rushed to the window. "Papa's back." Clara's relief was so intense she had to grip the table for support. Through the frost-covered glass, she could see Ethan and Tom dismounting, both men covered in snow and moving stiffly from the cold. "Girls, get blankets," Clara ordered, already pouring hot coffee. "And stoke the fire in the parlor." Ethan came through the door looking exhausted, ice crystals in his beard, his lips nearly blue from cold. His eyes found Clara immediately. "We got them moved," he said through chattering teeth. "Lost 2 calves, but the rest are safe." "Sit," Clara commanded, guiding him to a chair near the stove. "You're half frozen." She helped him out of his snow-crusted coat, trying not to notice how he winced. The girls appeared with blankets, wrapping them around their father while peppering him with questions. "Let your father warm up," Clara said gently. Tom, sit down before you fall down. Mrs. Flores, more coffee, please. She bustled around, getting both men situated, removing their wet boots and replacing them with dry socks she fetched from upstairs. It wasn't until both were warming by the fire with coffee and pie that she realized how naturally she'd taken charge, how the others had simply accepted her authority in the crisis. This is your mother's pie, Ethan said to the girls, surprise in his voice. Miss Whitmore made it, Margaret said proudly. We helped. Ethan's eyes found Clara's over the girls' heads. Thank you, he said quietly, and she knew he wasn't just talking about the pie. That evening, after Tom had gone to his quarters and the girls were in bed, Clara found Ethan still in the parlor, staring into the dying fire. He'd been quiet through dinner, withdrawn in a way that worried her. Are you all right? She asked, settling into the chair across from him. Just thinking. He was silent for a long moment. About Elizabeth. About how worried she'd get when I had to work in weather like this. She'd pace the kitchen looking out the window every few minutes. Any wife would worry, Clara said carefully. Would you? The question seemed to surprise him as much as her. I mean, if you were, that is... Yes, Clara said simply. I worried today. The girls did too. He looked at her, then really looked at her, and Clara felt exposed as if he could see straight through to her heart. You used her recipe book. I hope that was all right. The girls wanted... It was more than all right. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. For 3 years I've kept this house like a shrine to her. Her clothes still in the wardrobe, her recipe book untouched, that piano silent until you came. I told myself it was for the girls, but really, I was afraid that if I let anyone change anything, I'd lose her completely. You'll never lose her completely, Clara said softly. She lives on in the girls and the ranch you built together and the memories you share with them. When you played her piano that first night, I wanted to tell you to stop, but then I saw the girls' faces, saw them smiling, and I realized Elizabeth wouldn't want us frozen in grief. She was so full of life. She'd hate what I'd let this house become. It's not too late to change that. Isn't it? He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Clara, there's something I need to tell you. Her heart began to race. What is it? I'm falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, shocking in their directness. Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I know I shouldn't. Ethan continued, his back still to her. You're in my employ, under my protection. You've been hurt, abandoned, and the last thing you need is another man making promises. But I can't help it. Every day watching you with the girls, seeing you make this house come alive again. I tried to fight it, but... Ethan, Clara stood crossing to him. Look at me. He turned slowly, his face etched with vulnerability. I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered. The relief and joy that crossed his face made her chest tight. He reached out, cupping her face gently, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. Clara, I'm not ready. I thought I was, but... He dropped his hand. I still wear her ring. I still sometimes turn to tell her something and remember she's gone. You deserve better than a man still partially living in the past. I'm not asking you to forget her, Clara said. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. What if I'm never ready? What if I'm too broken? You're not broken, Clara said firmly. You're grieving. There's a difference. He laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. Most women would run from this mess. I'm not most women. And besides, she managed a small smile. Where would I run to? You know, I have nowhere else to go. Don't say that. Don't stay because you have no choice. I'm staying because I choose to, Clara interrupted, because I love the girls, because I love this ranch, and because I love you. Even if you're not ready, even if you never are, that's my choice to make. Ethan stared at her for a long moment, then pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. Clara could hear his heart racing, matching her own. You deserve so much more than I can offer right now, he murmured into her hair. Let me decide what I deserve, Clara said, her voice muffled against his shirt. They stood there holding each other until the fire died to embers. Finally, reluctantly, Ethan released her. We should be careful, he said. The girls, The girls are already planning our wedding, Clara said wryly. Margaret told me yesterday that I'd make a good mother. She did? Right after Sarah asked if I was going to stay forever. What did you tell her? That I'd stay as long as they'd have me. Ethan reached out, taking her hand. That might be a very long time indeed. Over the next weeks, they navigated this new territory carefully. During the day, they maintained proper boundaries, Clara as governess, Ethan as employer. But in the evenings, after the girls were asleep, they sat together by the fire, talking in ways they never had before. Ethan told her about meeting Elizabeth at a church social, how her laugh had drawn him across the room, about their early days on the ranch, working side by side to build something from nothing, about the day the twins were born, how Elizabeth had nearly died bringing them into the world, how he'd bargained with God to spare her. He gave me 3 more years, Ethan said quietly. Sometimes I wonder if that was the deal. 3 years to watch our girls grow, then payment due. God doesn't make deals like that, Clara said firmly. Sometimes terrible things just happen. Do you believe that after what Morrison did to you, Clara considered. James breaking our engagement was cruel, but it wasn't tragic. It was a redirection. If he hadn't sent that telegram, I'd be married to him now, trying to be the perfect merchant's wife, never knowing what? Never knowing that I could teach, that I could help raise 2 wonderful girls, that I could... She paused, gathering courage. That I could love someone the way I love you. Ethan squeezed her hand. They were sitting closer now, their knees almost touching. I want to kiss you, he said roughly. But if I start, I don't know if I can stop at just a kiss. Then don't start, Clara said, though every part of her wanted him to. Not until you're ready. Not until you're sure. December arrived with a blizzard that trapped them all inside for 3 days. The forced proximity revealed things Clara hadn't expected. She discovered that Ethan sang when he thought no one was listening, old folk songs in a pleasant baritone. The girls showed her their secret hideout in the attic, complete with treasures they'd collected. Mrs. Flores taught her to make tortillas, clucking disapprovingly at Clara's first misshapen attempts. On the 3rd day, cabin fever set in. The girls were bickering, Ethan was tense from not being able to work, and even Mrs. Flores was snapping at everyone. Clara finally had enough. Everyone in the parlor, she announced. We're going to put on a play. A play? Sarah perked up immediately. What kind of play, what? Margaret asked suspiciously. A Christmas pageant. Sarah, you'll be Mary. Margaret, you're Joseph. Mr. Caldwell. Ethan, he corrected automatically. Ethan will be the innkeeper and a wise man. Mrs. Flores, you're an angel. Tom. The ranch hand had been stuck in the main house by the storm. You're a shepherd. What about you? Margaret asked. I'm the narrator and director. Now we need costumes. What followed was controlled chaos. Sheets became robes, dish towels became headdresses, and Sarah's doll stood in for baby Jesus. They rehearsed all afternoon with much giggling and deliberate overacting. That evening, they performed for an audience of themselves, with Clara reading from the Bible while the others acted out the scenes. Sarah cradled her doll with surprising tenderness. Margaret forgot her lines and made up new ones that had everyone laughing. Mrs. Flores's angel kept switching between English and Spanish. Tom's shepherd seemed more interested in the invisible sheep than the Holy Family. But when Ethan, as the wise man, knelt before the manger, his voice was serious as he said, "We bring gifts to the child who will change the world." His eyes found Clara's across the room, holding them, as he added, "Sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected places." After the play, they sang carols. Clara played the piano while the others gathered around. Even Tom, who claimed he couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, joined in on the choruses. The storm still raged outside, but inside the house was warm and full of music. "Mama would have loved this," Sarah said, sleepily curled against her father's side. "Yes." Ethan agreed, his arm around both girls. She would have. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Clara remained at the piano playing softly. She didn't hear Ethan come back downstairs until he sat beside her on the bench. "Can't sleep?" she asked, her fingers still moving over the keys. "Too much to think about." He watched her hands. "You've given us Christmas again," Last year we barely acknowledged it. The year before, I don't even remember. Everyone needs Christmas, especially children. Not just the children. His hand covered hers on the keys, stilling her playing. Clara, I need to go to town tomorrow. The storm's broken and I have business at the bank. Come with me. The girls, Mrs. Flores can watch them for one day, please. There's something I need to do and I'd like you with me. Clara nodded, her heart racing at the intensity in his voice. The trip to town the next day was surreal. The snow had transformed the landscape into something from a fairy tale, all pristine white and glittering ice. Ethan was quiet as he drove the sleigh, the bells on the horses' harnesses, the only sound beyond the whisper of runners on snow. In town, he stopped first at the bank, asking Clara to wait outside. She walked along the boardwalk, nodding to people she now knew by name. Mrs. Patterson waved from the general store. The blacksmith touched his hat. She'd become part of this community without realizing it. Clara. She turned to find James Morrison approaching, looking dapper as always, despite the weather. James? She kept her voice neutral. You look well. Ranch life seems to agree with you. It does. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. My offer still stands. I've been thinking about you, about us. We could start fresh, forget the past. No. Clara's voice was firm. James, I need you to understand something. Even if there was no Ethan, no girls, no ranch, I would never marry you. You showed me who you are when you sent that telegram. A man who could discard a woman so easily, who could humiliate someone who trusted him. That's not a man I could ever love. His face flushed. You're making a mistake. Caldwell's still in love with his dead wife. Everyone knows it. What everyone knows and what's actually true are often very different things, Clara said calmly. Goodbye, James. She walked away feeling lighter than she had in months. The rejection that had seemed so devastating in October now felt like the liberation it truly was. She found Ethan waiting by the sleigh, a small package in his hand. Ready? He asked. But instead of heading home, he drove to the small cemetery at the edge of town. Clara's stomach tightened as she realized where they were going. I need to do this, Ethan said quietly. Will you come with me? She took his offered hand and they walked through the snow to a headstone marked Elizabeth Mary Caldwell, beloved wife and mother. Ethan stood silently for a long moment, then spoke. Lizzie, there's someone I want you to meet. Her name is Clara. She's teaching our girls, making them laugh again. She plays your piano and uses your recipes, and she's brought us back to life. He pulled off his glove, and Clara saw him twist his wedding ring, working it over his knuckle. I'll always love you. You gave me the girls, gave me the best years of my life, but it's time. It's time to let someone else in. He placed the ring at the base of the headstone, then turned to Clara. She would have liked you. You're both strong women who don't suffer fools. Clara felt tears on her cheeks, freezing in the cold air. Thank you for bringing me here, for letting me be part of this. They stood together in the snow-covered cemetery, surrounded by the peace of winter and the weight of goodbye. Finally, Ethan took her hand again. There's one more stop. He drove to Patterson's general store, helping her down and leading her inside. Mrs. Patterson looked up from her ledger, her eyes sharp with interest. Ethan Caldwell, what brings you to town in this weather? I need to look at rings, Mrs. Patterson. The older woman's eyes widened, darting between Ethan and Clara. Rings, you say? Engagement rings and wedding bands. Clara gasped. Ethan. He turned to her, taking both her hands. I know this is fast. I know you deserve a proper courtship time to be sure. But Clara, I am sure. I love you. The girls love you. You've become essential to us, to me. I don't want you as a governess anymore. I want you as my wife. Ethan, you just... At the cemetery, I said goodbye. Now I'm ready to say hello to our future. He dropped to one knee right there in the store, pulling out the small package he'd gotten from the bank. This was my grandmother's. It's not fancy, but it's been in my family for generations. He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. Clara Whitmore, you came to Wyoming expecting one life and found another. You've taught my children, saved my ranch from becoming a mausoleum, and shown me that it's possible to love again. Will you marry me?" Clara looked down at him. This weathered rancher who'd offered her shelter when she had nothing, who'd protected her from James, who'd trusted her with his children and his heart. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, of course, yes." He stood and kissed her, then, right there in the store with Mrs. Patterson clapping and customers peering around the aisles to see what the commotion was about. It was a kiss worth waiting for, full of promise and passion and the sweet relief of finally coming home. When they broke apart, both breathless Mrs. Patterson was beaming. "When's the wedding?" "Christmas Eve," Ethan said without hesitation, "if Clara agrees." "That's 2 weeks away," Clara protested. "I've waited long enough. Unless you want more time." Clara thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. Christmas Eve sounds perfect. The ride home was filled with plans and laughter. They decided to tell the girls together, though Clara suspected they'd guess the moment they saw the ring. Indeed, when they walked into the house together, Sarah took one look at Clara's hand and shrieked, "You're getting married!" Margaret threw herself at Clara. "You'll be our mother, our real mother." "Now, girls," Clara started, but Margaret interrupted. "Not our first mother, but our real mother now, the one who's here, who teaches us and loves us." Ethan gathered all 3 of them into his arms. "What do you think? Should we make Clara officially part of our family?" "Yes," both girls shouted. Mrs. Flores appeared from the kitchen, took one look at the scene, and burst into tears. "Gracias a Dios, it's about time." The next 2 weeks flew by in a whirl of preparations. Mrs. Patterson spread the news through town with impressive efficiency, and soon women were arriving with offers of help. Clara found herself with a borrowed wedding dress. Simpler than the one she'd made for James, but somehow more beautiful for being given in friendship. The girls threw themselves into preparing for their new mother. They practiced walking slowly to serve as flower girls, made paper decorations for the house, and whispered constantly about surprises they were planning. 3 days before the wedding, Clara was addressing invitations when she heard the girls arguing upstairs. "We can't tell her," Margaret hissed. "But what if she doesn't like it?" Sarah worried. "Papa said she would." Curious, Clara climbed the stairs quietly. Through their partially open door, she could see them huddled over something. "Girls, is everything all right?" They jumped Sarah, trying to hide something behind her back. "We have a present for you," Margaret said. "For the wedding, but we wanted it to be a surprise." "Can we give it to her now?" Sarah asked her sister. "Please." Margaret nodded, and Sarah brought out what she'd been hiding. It was a photograph in a simple frame. Elizabeth Caldwell, with the girls as babies, one in each arm, her smile radiant. "We want you to have this," Margaret said solemnly, "so you know we understand." "Understand what, sweetheart?" "That you're not replacing Mama. You're just adding to our family, like when we got the new calf. Buttercup is still Rosie's mother, but now Rosie is part of our herd too." Clara pulled both girls into her arms, the photograph pressed between them. "Thank you. This is the most precious gift anyone's ever given me." "Papa cries sometimes when he looks at pictures of Mama," Sarah whispered. "But they're good tears," he says, "because he's grateful he had her, even if it wasn't long enough." "Your papa is a wise man." "Will you put the picture in your room?" Margaret asked. "I'll put it where we can all see it," Clara promised. "Your mama is part of this family's story. We won't forget her." On the morning of Christmas Eve, Clara woke to find fresh snow falling, coating the world in pristine white. She dressed carefully in the borrowed dress, her hands shaking slightly as she pinned up her hair. A knock at the door interrupted her preparations. "Come in." It was Mrs. Flores carrying a cup of tea and something wrapped in tissue paper. "From Señor Ethan," she said, handing Clara the package. "He said you would understand." Clara unwrapped it carefully, gasping when she saw what it was. A blue hair comb, delicate and beautiful, with tiny pearls worked into the design. There was a note, "Something blue, something new. Today you become ours as we become yours. All my love, E." Clara pressed the note to her chest, blinking back tears that would ruin the small amount of rouge Mrs. Patterson had insisted she wear. The ceremony was held in the parlor, transformed with pine boughs and white ribbons. The entire town seemed to have crowded into the house, spilling into the kitchen and hallway. The judge from Cheyenne had come to officiate, having known Ethan since he first arrived in Wyoming. Clara stood at the top of the stairs looking down at the assembled crowd. Then the girls appeared, wearing matching green dresses Mrs. Flores had sewn, scattering dried rose petals from Elizabeth's garden. Behind them came Tom, who'd volunteered to give Clara away. "You sure about this, miss?" he asked gruffly. "Caldwell's a good man, but ranch life ain't easy." "I'm sure, Tom." He nodded and offered his arm. The crowd parted as they descended. At the end of the makeshift aisle stood Ethan, wearing his best suit, his face bright with joy and anticipation. When their eyes met, Clara felt the last of her doubts dissolve. This was where she belonged. The ceremony was simple but perfect. When the judge asked who gave this woman, Tom cleared his throat and said, "Her new family does," which made everyone chuckle and wipe their eyes. Ethan's hands were steady as he took hers. "Clara," he said, his voice carrying through the room, "you came to us broken and lost and somehow made us whole. I promise to love you, protect you, and cherish you all the days of my life. I promise to be the husband you deserve and to never take for granted the gift of your love." Clara had to swallow twice before she could speak. "Ethan, you gave me shelter when I had nowhere to go, purpose when I had none, and love when I thought I'd never find it. I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, to love your daughters as my own, and to make this house a home filled with music and laughter." The rings were exchanged, Ethan's grandmother's sapphire for her, a simple gold band for him. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed her with a tenderness that made the crowd sigh collectively. "Ladies and gentlemen," the judge announced, "may I present Mr. and Mrs. Ethan Caldwell." The girls immediately attached themselves to Clara's skirts. "Can we call you Mama now?" Sarah asked. Clara looked at Ethan, who nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. "If you'd like to." "Mama," both girls said together, and Clara found herself crying despite her best efforts. The celebration lasted well into the night. Tables groaned under the weight of food neighbors had brought. Someone produced a fiddle, and dancing began spilling onto the porch despite the cold. Clara danced with Ethan, with Tom, with the blacksmith and the banker, and even gruff old Mr. Henderson, who'd had too much of the punch Tom had spiked. Finally, as midnight approached and the last guests were leaving, Clara found herself alone with her new family. The girls had fallen asleep on the sofa, tangled together like puppies. Ethan sat in his chair, Clara on his lap, his arms around her waist. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "How could I regret the best day of my life?" "Even though you didn't get your Boston society wedding," Clara laughed. "Ethan Caldwell. This was perfect. A room full of people who actually care about us, our daughters, as flower girls, snow falling outside. I couldn't have imagined anything better." "Our daughters," he repeated. "I like the sound of that." "So do I." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you think Elizabeth would approve?" "I know she would. She told me once when she was sick that if anything happened to her, I should find someone who could love the girls like her own. Someone who would make me laugh again." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "She would have chosen you herself." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire die down, listening to the old house settle around them. This morning, Clara had woken as the governess. Tonight she would sleep as wife and mother. "We should put the girls to bed," she said eventually. "In a moment." Ethan tightened his arms around her. "I just want to hold my wife a little longer." Wife. The word that had once represented everything she'd lost now meant everything she'd found. Clara smiled, closing her eyes and letting herself sink into the warmth of Ethan's embrace, the soft breathing of the girls, the gentle ticking of the clock on the mantel. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in white, covering the old tracks and paths with fresh possibilities. Tomorrow would bring the first Christmas as a family. The new year would bring new challenges and joys. But tonight, in this moment, Clara Caldwell was exactly where she belonged. Christmas morning dawned bright and cold, with icicles hanging from the eaves like nature's own decorations. Clara woke slowly, momentarily disoriented by the warmth of another body beside her. Ethan's arm was draped across her waist, his breath steady against her neck. Her husband. The word still felt foreign and wonderful. She tried to slip out of bed without waking him, but his arm tightened around her. "Stay," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "It's barely dawn." The girls will be up soon wanting to open presents. Let them wait. He pulled her closer and Clara felt heat flood through her. Their wedding night had been tender and passionate by turns, Ethan treating her like precious glass until she'd demanded he stop being so careful. The memory made her blush even now. "You're thinking very loudly," Ethan said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Before Clara could respond, the door burst open, and two whirlwinds in nightgowns launched themselves onto the bed. "It's Christmas, it's Christmas," Sarah bounced energetically, making the whole bed shake. "And you're here," Margaret added, throwing her arms around Clara. "You're really here, and you're really our mama." "Where else would I be?" Clara laughed, catching Sarah before she could bounce right off the bed. "Mrs. Henderson said you might change your mind," Sarah informed them. "She said Papa was moving too fast and you'd regret it." Ethan growled. "That woman needs to mind her own business." "But you didn't change your mind, did you?" Margaret asked anxiously. Clara kissed her forehead. "Never. I'm exactly where I want to be." "Can we open presents now?" Sarah asked hopefully. "After breakfast," Ethan said firmly. "And after you both get dressed properly. It's freezing." The girls groaned but obeyed, racing back to their room. Clara started to get up, but Ethan pulled her back for a proper kiss. "Good morning, Mrs. Caldwell." "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell." "Any regrets in the clear light of day?" Clara pretended to consider. "Well, you do snore a little." "I do not snore." "And you steal all the blankets." Lies and slander. He kissed her again deeper this time. "I love you, Clara." "And I love you. But if we don't get up, the girls might explode from anticipation." Breakfast was a festive affair with Mrs. Flores outdoing herself with sweetbreads and hot chocolate. She'd arrived early despite it being Christmas, insisting that the new bride shouldn't have to cook on her first day as a wife. "Besides," she said with a wink, "I want to see the Niñas open their gifts." The parlor had been transformed overnight. Someone, probably Tom, had brought in a small pine tree and the girls had decorated it with paper stars and strings of dried berries. Presents wrapped in brown paper and tied with ribbon were arranged beneath. "This one first." Sarah thrust a package at Clara. "We made it ourselves." Inside was a sampler clearly worked on by both girls. Our family was stitched at the top in slightly crooked letters with all their names below Papa, Mama, Sarah, Margaret. The border was decorated with lopsided flowers and what might have been horses or possibly dogs. "It's beautiful," Clara said, her throat tight. "We'll hang it right over the mantel." The girls beamed and dove for more presents. Ethan had given them each new boots for riding and books Clara had helped him choose. Clara gave them hair ribbons from town and small dolls she'd made from scraps of fabric. "Your turn," Ethan said, handing Clara a large box. Inside was a heavy winter cloak in deep blue wool lined with fur. It must have cost a fortune. "Ethan, it's too much." "Nothing's too much for my wife. Besides, you'll need it. Wyoming winters are brutal, and I intend to keep you warm." She kissed him, not caring that the girls giggled or that Mrs. Flores pretended to cover her eyes. "Now yours," Clara said, suddenly nervous about the gift she'd prepared. Ethan unwrapped it carefully, revealing a leather journal embossed with his initials. "Look inside," Clara urged. On the first page she'd written the story of us. And below that she'd begun chronicling their life together, starting with that day at the train station. She'd included little drawings the girls had made pressed flowers from their wedding, and even the telegram from James that had started it all. "So we never forget how we found each other," she explained. Ethan was quiet for so long that Clara worried she'd overstepped. Then he pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "It's perfect," he said roughly. "You're perfect." "Papa's crying," Sarah announced with interest. "Happy tears," Ethan said, not bothering to deny it. "The very best kind." Tom arrived for Christmas dinner bearing his own gift for the newlyweds, a wooden cradle he'd carved himself. "For when you need it," he said gruffly, then fled to the barn before anyone could respond. Clara felt her face flame while Ethan chuckled. "Subtle as always, Tom." "What's the cradle for?" Margaret asked innocently. "For babies," Sarah said knowingly. "When are we getting a baby?" "That's up to God," Clara said quickly, while Ethan seemed to be choking on his coffee. "Well, tell him to hurry up," Sarah said. "I want a brother." I want a sister, Margaret countered. How about we focus on Christmas dinner? Clara suggested desperately. The meal was magnificent, roast goose with all the trimmings including Yorkshire pudding that Clara taught Mrs. Flores to make. As they ate, snow began to fall again thick and heavy, muffling all sound from outside and making the house feel like a warm island in a cold sea. After dinner, they gathered in the parlor again. Clara played Christmas carols while everyone sang, even Tom, who'd been convinced to stay despite his protests about intruding. The girls acted out the nativity again with some creative additions involving sheep that could fly and wise men who brought toys instead of gold. As evening fell, the girls began to droop. Ethan carried them up to bed one at a time, Clara following to tuck them in. "Best Christmas ever," Sarah murmured sleepily. "Because you're here," Margaret added, clutching Clara's hand. "You're the best present." Clara sat with them until they fell asleep, overwhelmed by the trust in their small faces. 3 months ago, she'd been alone and desperate. Now she had a family who needed her, wanted her, loved her. When she came downstairs, she found Ethan had sent Tom and Mrs. Flores home and was sitting by the fire, the leather journal in his lap. "Reading our story?" she asked, settling beside him, adding to it. He showed her his entry, his handwriting bold and certain. December 25th, 1875. First Christmas as a complete family. Clara has given us back our joy. "You gave me a home," Clara said softly. "No." Ethan set the journal aside and pulled her onto his lap. "We gave each other a home. There's a difference." They sat quietly watching the fire, occasionally kissing with the lazy contentment of people who have all the time in the world. Outside, the snow continued to fall. "Clara," Ethan's voice was thoughtful. "Yes, Tom's cradle. It doesn't have to stay empty for long if you don't want it to." Clara's breath caught. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I want more children with you, as many as you'll give me. Brothers for the girls, sisters, a house full of laughter and chaos." He paused. "But only if you want that too. You've already taken on so much." Clara silenced him with a kiss. "I want that. I want everything with you." They stayed by the fire until it died to embers, planning their future, discussing dreams they'd never dared voice before. More children, yes, but also expanding the ranch, perhaps building a school in town, so all the local children could have an education, traveling to San Francisco to see the ocean. "The girls would love that," Clara said. "They've been reading about ships and pirates lately." "Then we'll go. This spring maybe before—" Ethan's hand rested on her stomach, questioning. "Before I'm too pregnant to travel," Clara laughed. "We've only been married 1 day, and what a day it's been." January arrived with a blizzard that lasted 4 days, trapping them inside once again. But this time, there was no restlessness. The house had settled into new rhythms, with Clara fully integrated into their daily life. She still taught the girls each morning, but now she also helped Ethan with the ranch accounts in the evenings, her neat handwriting filling ledgers while he planned for spring. "You're better at this than I am," he admitted one night, watching her quickly calculate feed costs. "I had to manage our household expenses after my parents died. You learn to make every penny count when you don't have many." "You'll never have to worry about that again," Ethan said firmly. "I know." She reached over to squeeze his hand. "But I like being useful. Being a true partner, not just an ornament." "You could never be just an ornament." He lifted her hand to his lips. "Though you do decorate the place nicely." It was during the February thaw that Clara first suspected she might be pregnant. The smell of coffee, which she'd always loved, suddenly made her nauseated. Mrs. Flores noticed immediately when Clara fled the kitchen during breakfast preparation. "How long?" the older woman asked knowingly. "I'm not certain I am," Clara protested. "Mija, I've had 7 children. I know the look. How long since your monthly time?" Clara counted back, her eyes widening. 6 weeks, but that would mean the wedding night. Strong swimmers your husband has. Mrs. Flores grinned. "The girls will be thrilled." "Don't tell anyone yet," Clara begged. "Not even Ethan. Not until I'm sure." But keeping the secret proved difficult, especially when her morning sickness worsened. Ethan found her one morning retching behind the barn. "Clara, what's wrong?" "Should I fetch the doctor?" "No." She straightened, wiping her mouth. I'm fine. Just something I ate. He looked skeptical. You've been tired lately, and you barely touched dinner last night. I'm fine, she insisted, but her traitorous stomach chose that moment to rebel again. When she finished being sick, Ethan was standing with his arms crossed, comprehension dawning on his face. Clara, are you… She nodded miserably. I wanted to wait to tell you until I was certain. How long have you known? 2 weeks. I'm sorry, I just… He swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she squeaked in protest. Ethan, you'll make me sick again. We're having a baby. His face was radiant with joy. Truly. Truly. Probably in September by my count. He set her down gently, his hands immediately going to her still flat stomach. A baby. Our baby. The girls will be impossible when they find out, Clara warned. Then let's tell them together tonight. At dinner, Ethan kept grinning at nothing while Clara pushed food around her plate, unable to eat. Finally, Margaret couldn't stand it anymore. What's wrong with everyone? You're both acting strange. Nothing's wrong, Ethan said. Actually, everything's wonderful. Clara has something to tell you. 2 expectant faces turned to her. Clara took a breath. How would you feel about becoming big sisters? For a moment, there was silence. Then pandemonium erupted. A baby! Sarah shrieked, jumping up from her chair. When is it a boy or girl? Can we name it? Margaret fired questions rapidly. September, we don't know yet, and we'll discuss names as a family. Clara answered, laughing. Both girls threw themselves at her, and Ethan quickly intervened. Gentle, you have to be careful with Mama now. Why? Sarah asked. She's not sick, is she? No, but growing a baby is hard work. She needs rest and good food and no stress. We'll be perfect angels, Margaret promised solemnly. I'll believe that when I see it, Ethan said, but he was smiling. Spring arrived slowly, the snow melting to reveal the green grass beneath. The ranch came alive with new calves, including Rosie's little brother, whom the girls named Spots for obvious reasons. Clara's pregnancy progressed well, though her expanding waistline made some tasks difficult. You should be resting, Ethan fretted constantly. I'm pregnant, not invalid, Clara retorted, continuing to teach the girls and help with lighter ranch work. But as summer approached and her belly grew round and heavy, she had to admit defeat. Climbing stairs left her breathless. Her back ached constantly and her ankles swelled in the heat. The girls appointed themselves her guardians, fetching things so she wouldn't have to stand reading to her while she rested. The baby's moving, Sarah exclaimed one day, her hand on Clara's stomach. It kicked me. That means it's strong, Margaret said knowingly. Papa says all Caldwell babies are fighters. This one certainly is, Clara agreed, rubbing the spot where a tiny foot seemed determined to crack her ribs. August was brutally hot, and Clara spent most days on the porch fanning herself and trying to find a comfortable position. Ethan had moved their bed downstairs to the small room off the kitchen so she wouldn't have to climb stairs. I'm enormous, she complained one evening, looking down at her swollen belly. You're beautiful, Ethan said firmly, kissing her forehead. You're carrying our child. You've never been more beautiful. Liar, but a sweet one. The pain started on September 3rd, just after midnight. Clara woke to a cramping sensation that made her gasp. She tried to let Ethan sleep, but another pain stronger this time had her gripping his arm. What is it? He was instantly awake. I think it's time. Ethan leaped from bed, nearly falling in his haste. I'll get Mrs. Flores and the midwife. Don't move. Where exactly would I go? Clara asked, but he was already gone. The house erupted into controlled chaos. Mrs. Flores arrived and immediately took charge, sending Ethan to fetch the midwife and Tom to keep the girls occupied. Clara could hear them protesting from their room, demanding to know what was happening. Your mama's having the baby, she heard Tom say. Now you stay put like good girls. Labor was long and difficult. The midwife, Mrs. Anderson, was competent but concerned. Baby's big, she said after examining Clara. This might take a while. It took 18 hours. 18 hours of increasing pain of Ethan pacing outside the door, because the midwife wouldn't let him in, of Clara wondering if she had the strength to do this. "I can't," she gasped after a particularly brutal contraction. "Yes, you can," Mrs. Flores said firmly. "You're strong. You came across the country alone. You tamed those wild girls. You can do this." Finally, as the sun was setting, the midwife announced, "One more push." Clara bore down with everything she had left, and suddenly there was a cry. Strong, indignant, very much alive. "It's a boy, Mrs." Anderson announced quickly, cleaning the baby and wrapping him in a blanket. "A big, healthy boy." Clara sobbed with relief as the baby was placed in her arms. He had Ethan's dark hair, but her blue eyes, and when he gripped her finger, she fell completely in love. Is it safe?" Ethan's voice came from the doorway. "Come meet your son," Clara said. Ethan approached slowly, as if in a dream. When he saw the baby, his face crumpled. "A son," he whispered. "Clara, he's perfect." "What should we name him?" Clara asked. "William," Ethan said without hesitation. "After your father, William Thomas Caldwell." Clara's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Really? He should carry part of your family, too." The girls were finally allowed in, approaching the bed with unusual caution. "He's so small," Margaret whispered. "He's actually quite large," the midwife said with a laugh. 9 pounds at least." "Can we hold him?" Sarah asked. Clara showed them how to support his head, and each girl took a turn holding their brother, their faces serious with the responsibility. "He's ours," Sarah said wonderingly. "Our real brother." "Forever and always," Clara confirmed. That night, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet, Clara lay in bed with William in the cradle beside her, Ethan's arm around her shoulders. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For everything. For coming into our lives. For making us a family again. For our son. For being you." Clara turned to look at him. "I should thank you. You saved me, Ethan." "We saved each other." William started to fuss, and Clara lifted him to nurse. Ethan watched with wonder this simple, profound act of mother-feeding child. "I want more," he said suddenly. "More babies. I want to fill this house with children." "Let me recover from this one first," Clara laughed. "But yes, I want more too." October brought William's first smile and the girls' delight at making him laugh. November saw him rolling over with the whole family cheering as if he'd performed a miracle. By December, as they prepared for their second Christmas together, he was sitting up and babbling sounds that Sarah insisted were words. "He said my name," she claimed. "He said Baba," Margaret corrected. "That's not a name. It could be short for Sarah. Everything's short for Sarah according to you." Clara intervened before the argument could escalate. "He'll say both your names soon enough. Right now, help me with these cookies." They were making Christmas cookies to take to town, a new tradition Clara had started. The kitchen was warm and smelled of cinnamon and sugar, with William in his high chair cheerfully smearing flour on himself. "Perfect," Ethan said from the doorway, and Clara looked up to find him watching them with an expression of such contentment it made her heart ache. "What's perfect?" "This. All of this. My girls covered in flour, my son eating it, my wife somehow making cookies despite the chaos." He crossed to her, kissing her soundly despite the girls' protests about mushiness. "Last year I thought I'd found happiness again. This year, I know I have." Christmas Eve afternoon, they loaded into the sleigh to take cookies to neighbors. The girls were bundled in their new cloaks, gifts from Clara's sewing, and William was wrapped so thoroughly only his nose was visible. Their first stop was the Hendersons, where even the perpetually disapproving Mrs. Henderson softened at the sight of the baby and the cookies. "You've done well," she told Clara quietly. "The family needed you. I needed them just as much." Their last stop was the cemetery. Clara waited in the sleigh with William while Ethan took the girls to their mother's grave. She watched them place a wreath they'd made, saw Ethan kneel in the snow to say something she couldn't hear. Margaret and Sarah each kissed their hands and pressed them to the stone. When they returned, Sarah climbed up beside Clara. "We told Mama about William," she said matter-of-factly. And about how happy you make Papa. She's glad." "How do you know?" Clara asked gently. "Because the sun came out just when we were leaving. That's her saying hello." That evening, after cookies and milk had been set out for Santa Claus, and the girls had hung their stockings, the family gathered in the parlor. Clara played the piano while they sang William bouncing in Ethan's arms, trying to sing along in his baby babble. "Story," Margaret demanded when they'd exhausted their repertoire of carols. "What story?" Clara asked, though she suspected she knew. "Our story. How you came to be our mama." Clara looked at Ethan, who nodded with a smile. She pulled the girls onto the sofa with her while Ethan settled in his chair with William. "Once upon a time," Clara began, "there was a woman who got on a train in Boston thinking she knew exactly where her life was going. She told them the story they'd heard before but never tired of. The telegram, the train station, the collision with two copper-haired whirlwinds. She told them about learning to milk cows and make tamales, about geography lessons and piano music returning to a silent house. She told them about falling in love with their father and choosing to become a family. And then William came," Sarah added when Clara reached their wedding. "Yes, then William came and made our family even more complete." "Will more babies come?" Margaret asked hopefully. Clara and Ethan exchanged glances over the girls' heads. "Maybe," Clara said, "if we're blessed." "We're already blessed," Ethan said firmly. "Everything else is just extra joy." Later, after the girls were asleep and William was settled in his cradle, Clara and Ethan sat together on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in a blanket looking at the stars. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if James hadn't sent that telegram?" Ethan asked. Clara considered. "I'd be married to the wrong man, living the wrong life, never knowing what I was missing. And I'd still be frozen in grief watching my girls grow wild, thinking I'd never love again." "Then thank God for James Morrison's faithlessness," Clara said with a laugh. "The best thing that ever happened to us," Ethan agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, breath misting in the cold air, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Somewhere in the barn, a horse nickered. From the henhouse came the soft clucking of chickens settling for the night. "Clara, I have something for you. Christmas present." "It's not Christmas yet." "Close enough." He pulled out a small wrapped package. "Open it." Inside was a locket, gold and delicate, with space for 4 tiny photographs. "For the children," Ethan explained, "so you can keep them with you always." Clara opened it to find he'd already placed photographs inside. The twins from last month, William from just last week, and surprisingly a small image of herself and Ethan from their wedding day. "It's perfect," she whispered, throat tight with emotion. "There's more." He pulled out an envelope. "This came yesterday." Clara opened it confused, then gasped. It was a deed to the ranch, with her name on it alongside his. "Ethan, you're not just my wife, you're my partner in everything. The ranch is as much yours as mine. If anything happens to me..." "Don't say that." "Clara, we have to be practical. If something happens to me, you and the children will be protected. The ranch will be yours free and clear." She threw her arms around him, buried her face in his neck. "Nothing's going to happen to you. God willing. But just in case he has other plans, you'll be safe. All of you." They held each other as snow began to fall, light flakes that danced in the lamplight spilling from the house. From inside came the sound of William crying, probably hungry again. "I should go to him," Clara said, but didn't move. "In a moment." Ethan held her tighter. "Let me hold my wife a little longer." "Always," Clara promised. "You can hold me always." As she finally rose to tend to their son, Clara looked back at the house, their house, glowing warm against the winter night. Through the windows, she could see the Christmas tree they'd decorated, the stockings hanging by the fire, the piano that no longer sat silent. 2 years ago, she'd been alone in Boston, struggling to survive. 1 year ago, she'd stood on a train platform in a wedding dress, abandoned and humiliated. Now she was wife, mother, partner, beloved. The Lord certainly worked in mysterious ways. "Clara," Ethan called from inside. He won't settle. I think he wants his mama." She smiled, pulling her shawl tighter as she headed inside. "Coming." As she entered the warm house, William's cries turned to gurgles of delight at seeing her. She lifted him from Ethan's arms, settling into the rocking chair to nurse him. Ethan sat nearby, watching them with the expression he got sometimes, like he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. "What are you thinking?" Clara asked softly. "Just remembering that first day. You in that wedding dress at the station, looking so lost and proud at the same time. I almost didn't approach you. What changed your mind? The girls crashing into you seemed like a sign, like fate pushing us together. You don't believe in fate." "I didn't. But how else do you explain it? You came thousands of miles to marry the wrong man just to end up with the right one." William finished nursing, and Clara shifted him to her shoulder, patting his back gently. "Maybe Elizabeth had something to do with it, making sure her family found someone to love them." Ethan's eyes glistened. "Maybe. She would have liked you, Clara. Would have been glad it was you." A soft sound from the stairs made them look up. The twins stood there in their nightgowns, looking sheepish. "We couldn't sleep," Margaret said. "Too excited about Christmas," Sarah added. "Come here, you two," Clara said, holding out her free arm. They scrambled over, curling up against her sides, while Ethan moved to sit on the arm of the chair, his hand on Clara's shoulder. William babbled happily, reaching for his sister's hair. "Tell us again about the train station," Sarah requested sleepily. "Again, you know it by heart." "Please, Mama." Clara looked around at her family. These people who had become her whole world, and began once more. "I stepped off the train in my wedding dress, the telegram crumpled in my hand." The story had barely begun when Clara felt the familiar flutter in her belly, different from William's kicks months ago, softer but unmistakable. She paused mid-sentence, her hand going to her stomach. "Mama," Margaret noticed immediately. "Are you all right?" Clara looked at Ethan, who was already watching her with concern. I think we might be having another baby." The room erupted. Sarah squealed. William clapped his hands, though he didn't understand why, and Margaret immediately began planning where the new cradle would go. Ethan crossed to Clara in 2 strides, kneeling beside the chair. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing Doc Morrison." She smiled at the irony of the name. The new doctor who'd taken over the practice was thankfully no relation to James. "I've been feeling different for weeks, but I wanted to be sure. Another baby." Sarah was practically vibrating with excitement. "Can it be a girl this time?" "We don't get to choose," Ethan explained, though his eyes never left Clara's face. "Are you happy?" he asked her quietly. "Incredibly happy, though we'll need a bigger house soon at this rate." "Then we'll build one. We'll build whatever you need." Spring of 1877 came early, melting the snow by March, and bringing with it a prosperity the ranch had never seen. The cattle were thriving, the horses Ethan had started breeding were drawing buyers from as far as Denver, and Clara's vegetable garden had expanded into a small farm operation of its own, with Mrs. Flores selling preserves and pickles in town, under the label Caldwell Ranch Goods. Clara's pregnancy progressed smoothly, though chasing after William, who had learned to walk and seemed determined to explore every dangerous corner of the ranch, left her exhausted. The girls had taken their roles as big sisters to him seriously, and now, with another baby coming, they treated Clara like spun glass. "You shouldn't be carrying water," Margaret scolded one morning, taking the bucket from Clara's hands. "I'm pregnant, not broken." Clara protested the same argument she'd made during her first pregnancy. "Papa says you need to be careful," Sarah chimed in. "He says you're carrying precious cargo. Your father worries too much." But secretly, Clara loved how protective they all were. Even William, barely 18 months old, would pat her belly gently and say, "baby," in his sweet voice. The second week of April brought unexpected visitors. Clara was teaching the girls French, a new addition to their curriculum that had them both delighted and frustrated, when she heard a carriage approaching. Through the window, she saw an elegant vehicle out of place on the rough ranch roads. "Stay here," she told the girls, smoothing her dress as best she could over her rounded belly. She opened the door to find a well-dressed elderly couple, the woman clutching a lace handkerchief, the man standing stiffly with a silver-headed cane. "May I help you?" "We're looking for Mrs. Clara Caldwell," the woman said, her voice cultured with a Boston accent that made Clara's heart skip. "I'm Clara Caldwell." The woman's face crumpled. "Oh, my dear, you look just like your mother." Clara gripped the door frame. "Who are you?" We're your grandparents, the man said gruffly. Your mother's parents, the Worthingtons. Clara stared at them. Her mother had told her that her parents had disowned her when she married Clara's father, a mere shopkeeper beneath their social station. She'd believed them dead. My mother said you wanted nothing to do with us. Mrs. Worthington, her grandmother, started crying in earnest. We were fools, prideful, stubborn fools. When we heard about the cholera outbreak, about your parents, we tried to find you, but you'd already left Boston. It took us this long to track you down, Mr. Worthington added. We hired investigators. They said you'd come here to marry someone named Morrison, but then the trail went cold until we learned you'd married Ethan Caldwell instead. Why now? Clara asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Why after all these years? Because we're old, her grandfather said simply. Because we realized too late that pride is a cold bedfellow. Because we want to know our only grandchild before it's too late. Mama? Sarah appeared at her elbow. Is everything all right? Clara looked down at her daughter, because that's what Sarah was regardless of blood, and made a decision. Sarah, would you please find your father? Tell him we have guests. Sarah ran off, and Clara stepped aside. Please come in. She led them to the parlor, noting how they took in everything. The comfortable but modest furniture, the children's drawings on the walls, William's toys scattered on the rug. Mrs. Worthington's eyes lingered on the piano. You play, your mother was so talented. She taught me before she died. We should have been there, her grandmother whispered. We should have helped. Ethan arrived windblown and dusty from working, but his presence immediately steadied Clara. She quickly explained who their visitors were, watched his jaw tighten. You abandoned your daughter and granddaughter, and now you appear expecting what forgiveness money. Ethan, Clara said softly, but she appreciated his protectiveness. We expect nothing, Mr. Worthington said with dignity. We came to apologize, to try to make amends if possible, and he pulled out a leather portfolio to give Clara what should have been hers years ago. Inside were legal documents, bank drafts, deeds. Clara's head spun as she read through them. $20,000, she gasped. Your inheritance, what your mother would have had if she hadn't married for love. What should have gone to you when they died? Mrs. Worthington leaned forward. We can't buy forgiveness, but we can at least ensure you're provided for. I don't need your money, Bishwan, Clara said automatically. We're doing fine. It's not about need, her grandfather said. It's about right. It's yours by rights. The twins had crept into the room, watching with wide eyes. William toddled in after them, making a beeline for Clara's lap. You have children, Mrs. Worthington said wonderingly. 3 with another on the way, Clara confirmed, lifting William despite her awkward belly. Girls, come meet your great-grandparents. The introduction was stilted at first. The Worthingtons clearly had no experience with children, especially frontier children who caught frogs and helped birth calves. But then Margaret Ever-Direct asked, why did you not want our grandmama to marry our grandpapa? Because we were foolish, Mrs. Worthington said honestly. We thought money and status mattered more than love. We were wrong. Our first mama's parents died before we were born, Sarah offered, so we never had grandparents before. First mama, Mr. Worthington looked confused. My late wife, Ethan explained. Clara is the girl's stepmother, though we don't much use that term. She's just mama, Margaret said firmly. She chose us, and we chose her. Mrs. Worthington was crying again. Your mother would have been so proud, she told Clara, to see you with a family happy. Are you happy? Mr. Worthington asked abruptly. Clara looked around the room, at Ethan strong and steady, at the girls who had claimed her heart, at William babbling in her lap at the home they'd built together. Incredibly happy. Then that's all that matters. They stayed for dinner, awkward at first around Mrs. Flores's spicy food, but warming as the evening progressed. Mr. Worthington told stories of Clara's mother as a child, how she'd been fearless and kind. Mrs. Worthington taught the girls a clapping game she'd taught their grandmother years ago. You'll visit again? Clara asked as they prepared to leave, surprising herself with the invitation. If you'll have us, her grandmother said hopefully. We're staying in Cheyenne for the month. We'd like to know you to be part of your children's lives if you'll allow it." Clara looked at Ethan, who nodded slightly. "Sunday dinner," she offered. "Come for Sunday dinner." After they left, Clara sat in the parlor, overwhelmed. The money alone was staggering, more than the ranch made in 5 years. But more than that was the connection to her past, to her mother's family. "You all right?" Ethan asked, settling beside her. "It's strange. I grieved them thinking they were dead. Then I was angry learning they'd abandoned us. Now," she shrugged. "They're old, Ethan. They look so frail." "You have a good heart," Clara Caldwell. "Too good sometimes." "They're trying to make amends. With money." "No," Clara said thoughtfully. "The money is guilt. Coming here facing me wanting to know the children. That's love. Late and complicated, but still love." William had fallen asleep in her arms, his weight comfortable against her belly. The girls were upstairs supposedly getting ready for bed, but probably discussing the day's events in excited whispers. "The money could change everything," Ethan said carefully. "We could build that bigger house, hire more hands, send the children to college someday." "Is that what you want?" He pulled her close, careful of William between them. "I want what makes you happy. The money the grandparents? It's your decision." "Our decision. We're partners, remember." Sunday dinner became a tradition. The Worthingtons extended their stay in Cheyenne, then purchased a small house in town to be closer. It wasn't always easy. There were cultural clashes, moments of awkwardness, old hurts that surfaced. But gradually, they became family. Mrs. Worthington taught the girls embroidery and proper tea service skills Clara had never learned. Mr. Worthington and Ethan discovered a mutual interest in horse breeding and spent hours discussing bloodlines and training methods. William became particularly attached to his great-grandmother, toddling after her calling Gone. June brought the birth of Clara and Ethan's second child together, a daughter they named Rose Elizabeth, for the late blooming roses in Elizabeth's garden, and for the woman who'd first made Ethan a father. The labor was easier than William's, though Ethan still paced outside like a caged bear until he heard the baby's cry. "A girl!" Mrs. Flores announced triumphantly. "Beautiful, like her mama." Rose was indeed beautiful, with Clara's delicate features and surprisingly red hair that no one could account for. "Maybe from your father's side," Mrs. Worthington suggested, cradling her newest great-grandchild. "Papa had auburn hair as a young man," Clara remembered, before it went gray. The girls were enchanted with their sister fighting over who got to hold or help change her, rock her to sleep. William was less impressed, poking the baby suspiciously and declaring no when told to be gentle. That fall, they broke ground on the new house. Not ostentatious, Clara wouldn't allow that, but larger with enough bedrooms for their growing family and a proper schoolroom for lessons. The old house would become quarters for the ranch hands they were hiring as the operation expanded. "You sure about this?" Ethan asked, watching the foundation being laid. "It's just a house," Clara said. "Home is wherever you and the children are." But she understood his concern. The original house held their history. Their first Christmas as a family, William's birth, countless evenings by the fire. But it also held sadness, those 3 years of grieving after Elizabeth's death. "Maybe we both need a fresh start," she said. "A house that's ours from the beginning." The Worthingtons returned to Boston for the winter, but promised to come back in spring. They left with photographs and locks of the children's hair, with letters to write and promises to keep in touch. Clara stood on the porch, watching their carriage disappear, feeling an unexpected loss. "You'll see them again," Ethan assured her. "I know, it's just, I spent so many years alone, and now I have so much family, I don't know what to do with it all." "Embrace it," he said simply. "Love them all as much as you can for as long as you can." Christmas of 1877 was spent in the new house, though construction wasn't quite complete. The parlor smelled of fresh paint and sawdust, but the tree stood tall in the corner, decorated with ornaments the children had made. The piano had been moved, carefully positioned in the exact spot Clara wanted, where the acoustics were best. "Play the Christmas song," Sarah demanded as she did every year. Clara began Silent Night. Her fingers sure on the keys, the family gathered around. Ethan holding Rose, who at 6 months was trying desperately to sing along William on Margaret's lap. Sarah leaning against Clara's side. All is calm, all is bright. They sang together, their voices blending in the way that only families can achieve imperfect but beautiful in its imperfection. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Clara and Ethan stood in their new bedroom looking out at the snow-covered ranch. "Do you remember," Ethan said, "that first Christmas when you played the piano and the girls cried because it sounded happy again?" "I remember everything," Clara said. "Every moment from that train platform to now." "Any regrets?" Clara turned in his arms. "How could I regret the life that brought me you? Brought me our children. Brought me home." He kissed her, then slow and deep with all the passion that still burned between them. When they broke apart, he kept her close. "I love you, Clara Caldwell." "And I love you, Ethan Caldwell." Spring of 1878 arrived with a letter from Boston. Clara's grandmother was ill, too ill to travel. The letter, written in her grandfather's shaky hand, asked if Clara could possibly come to visit. "Go," Ethan said immediately. "Take the children. They should see Boston, and your grandparents should see them while there's time." The journey was an adventure. The twins, now 8, were old enough to appreciate the magnitude of traveling across the country. William, nearly 3, spent the entire trip with his nose pressed to the window. Rose, approaching her first birthday, charmed everyone in their train car. Boston felt foreign to Clara now. The buildings seemed too close together, the air too thick with coal smoke. But her grandparents' Beacon Hill mansion was exactly as her mother had described it in stories. Elegant, imposing, filled with portraits of stern ancestors. Mrs. Worthington, confined to bed, but alert, cried when she saw them. "Oh, Clara, you brought them all." "Families should be together," Clara said simply. They stayed 2 weeks. The children explored Boston with wide eyes, the harbor, the common, the grand houses so different from their ranch. The twins attended a tea party with their grandmother's elderly friends, behaving perfectly, despite their usual wildness. William discovered a passion for boats at the harbor. Rose took her first steps in the same nursery where Clara's mother had taken hers. "I want you to have this," Mrs. Worthington said on their last day, pressing a worn leather journal into Clara's hands. "Your mother's diary from when she was young, before she met your father, before the estrangement, so you can know who she was." Clara opened it carefully, seeing her mother's familiar handwriting, younger and more exuberant. "Today I met the most interesting young man at the market. Father would be horrified, but he's a shopkeeper's son. But when he smiles..." "She loved him from the start," her grandmother said. "We should have seen it, should have understood that love like that is rare." "You understand now," Clara said gently. "That's what matters." Mrs. Worthington died 2 months after they returned to Wyoming. Mr. Worthington followed her 3 weeks later, unable or unwilling to live without his wife of 52 years. They left everything to Clara, the Boston house, the investments of fortune that made the earlier inheritance look modest. "We don't have to keep it all, Tim," Clara told Ethan as they read through the will. "We could donate to the church, build a school in town." "We'll do all of that," Ethan agreed. "But we'll also save for the children. Make sure they can choose their own paths, whether that's ranching or something else." That summer brought another pregnancy, which Clara suspected might be twins from how sick she was and how quickly she grew. Doc Morrison confirmed it in August. "2 heartbeats," he said with a grin. "You folks are going to need an even bigger house." The twins were born in December, 2 days before Christmas. Another boy and girl, whom they named James and Julia. The irony of naming their son James wasn't lost on Clara, but it had been her father's middle name, and she wanted to honor him. 6 children, Ethan marveled, holding both newborns while Clara recovered. "We have 6 children." "Are we done?" Clara asked, exhausted but euphoric. "That's up to you. You're the one doing all the hard work." Clara looked at their family gathered around the bed. Margaret and Sarah, now 9, and so helpful William and Rose playing on the floor, the new babies perfect and tiny. "Let's see how we manage 6 first." They managed beautifully, if chaotically. The house was constantly filled with noise, laughter, crying music, arguments, footsteps racing up and down stairs. Clara had help, now a young woman from town who served as nanny and assistant teacher, but she remained hands-on with all the children. Years passed in a blur of birthdays, Christmases, first days of school, scraped knees, and bedtime stories. Margaret showed an aptitude for medicine, reading every medical text she could find. Sarah discovered a talent for writing filling journals with stories and observations. William followed Ethan everywhere, clearly destined to run the ranch someday. Rose was musical, like Clara, spending hours at the piano. The twins James and Julia were still too young to show their paths, but they were inseparable, sharing their own secret language. In 1882, when Clara was pregnant with what she swore would be their last child, a familiar figure appeared at their door. She was hanging laundry, her back aching when she saw him approach on horseback. James Morrison had aged poorly. His once handsome face was bloated with drink, his clothes shabby, despite their pretentious cut. He dismounted unsteadily. "Clara." "Mr. Morrison." She kept her voice steady, though her heart raced. "What brings you here?" "I heard about your inheritance, your good fortune." His eyes traveled over her expensive dress, the large house behind her. "Seems you did well for yourself." "I did." "I'm in some financial difficulty," he said bluntly. "Bad investments. The store is gone. I thought given our history you might be willing to help." Clara stared at him. This man who had humiliated her, who had nearly destroyed her, was asking for money. "Our history," she repeated incredulously. "We nearly married. Surely that means something." "It means you taught me to recognize a good man when I found one." She saw Ethan approaching from the barn, alerted by one of the children. "Which I did." "Clara, please." "I have nothing." "You have exactly what you chose," Clara said firmly. "You chose a saloon girl over me. You chose flash over substance. You chose poorly." Ethan reached them, positioning himself slightly in front of Clara. "Morrison, you need to leave." "Caldwell," James's voice turned nasty. "Enjoying my leavings." Ethan moved so fast Clara barely saw it. His fist connected with James's jaw, sending the other man sprawling in the dust. "That's my wife you're speaking about. The mother of my children. You'll show respect or I'll teach you some." James struggled to his feet, blood dripping from his nose. "You'll regret this." "The only thing I regret is not hitting you 7 years ago," Ethan said calmly. "Now get off my land." James stumbled to his horse and rode away without another word. Clara never saw him again, though she heard years later that he drunk himself to death in Denver. "Violence doesn't solve anything," Clara said mildly, though she was fighting a smile. "Maybe not," Ethan agreed, flexing his bruised knuckles. "But it sure felt good." Their last child, another daughter named Grace, was born that September. True to Clara's word, she was their last, but not by choice. The doctor said another pregnancy would be dangerous. Clara mourned briefly for the children they wouldn't have, then counted her blessings in the 7 they did. Time moved differently as the children grew. Seasons blended together. Spring branding, summer harvests, autumn preparations, winter's quiet intimacy. Clara taught them all, even as the older ones began to surpass her in certain subjects. Margaret went to college in Denver to study medicine, the first woman in her class. Sarah's stories were published in magazines back east. William took over more and more of the ranch operations. In 1890, at the age of 39, Clara stood once again on the platform at Cheyenne Station. But this time she wasn't arriving. She was seeing Margaret off to medical school in Chicago. "Write every week," Clara instructed, fussing with Margaret's coat. "I will, Mama. I promise. And if you need anything, I'll telegraph immediately." Margaret hugged her tightly. "Thank you for everything, for choosing us all those years ago." "You chose me just as much," Clara reminded her. The train pulled away, taking her eldest daughter into her own future. Ethan wrapped his arm around Clara as they watched it disappear. "You all right?" "Yes, sad but proud. Is that possible?" With children, everything's possible simultaneously. They returned to the ranch to find chaos. Rose was teaching the twins a new piano piece. William was arguing with a ranch hand about breeding schedules. Sarah was reading her latest story to anyone who would listen, and Grace at 8 had somehow gotten herself stuck in the apple tree. "Normal day, then," Ethan said dryly, going to rescue Grace. That evening, Clara played the piano as she did every night. The songs had changed over the years, from classical pieces to ragtime to folk songs the children learned at school. But the feeling remained the same: family gathered love, shared home. "Tell us the story," Grace demanded from her position on Clara's lap. "Which story?" "The story. About the train and the telegram and how you became our mama." Clara looked around at her family. Some blood, some not, all hers by choice and love. "I stepped off the train in my wedding dress," she began as she had so many times before. The telegram crumpled in my hand, my heart broken. But even as she told the familiar tale, Clara knew the real story was bigger than that moment of devastation. It was Ethan's steadfast love, the girl's trust, the babies who came one after another, the grandparents who sought forgiveness, the community that embraced her. It was choosing to build a life from the ashes of another, choosing love over fear, choosing to stay when she could have run. "And then what happened?" Grace asked sleepily, though she knew perfectly well. "Then I lived happily ever after," Clara said simply. "Not perfectly, not without sorrow or struggle, but happily." "That's not how the story usually ends," William pointed out from his chair by the fire. "No," Clara agreed, looking at Ethan over Grace's head. "But it's how our story continues, day after day, year after year, happy and grateful and home." Later, after the children were all in bed, even William, who at 17 thought himself too old for bedtimes, Clara and Ethan sat on the porch as they had that first night so many years ago. "Any regrets?" Ethan asked their old question. Clara considered. Her body showed the wear of 7 pregnancies. Her hands were roughened from years of ranch work. She'd never seen Europe, never worn silk gowns to fancy parties, never lived the life she'd once imagined as a young woman in Boston. "Not a single one," she said finally. "Every choice, every moment led me here, led me to you, to our children, to this life. How could I regret that?" "Even James Morrison," Clara laughed. "Especially James Morrison. Without his telegram, I'd never have found my real family." Ethan pulled her closer, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere in the house, a child coughed. A baby cried briefly, then settled. The old house creaked and sighed around them, full of life and memory. "I love you, Clara Caldwell," Ethan said, as he had every night for 15 years. "And I love you, Ethan Caldwell," she replied, as she would for all the years to come. In the distance, a train whistle sounded, carrying someone toward their destiny, just as one had carried Clara toward hers all those years ago. She smiled, remembering the frightened, heartbroken girl who'd stepped onto that platform in a wedding dress, not knowing that her greatest loss would become her greatest gain. "Welcome home, Mrs. Caldwell," Ethan whispered, echoing words he'd said so many times. "I am home," Clara replied, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "I've been home since the moment you caught me from falling." The stars continued their eternal dance. The ranch settled into sleep, and Clara Caldwell, who had once been Clara Whitmore, who had almost been Clara Morrison, sat with her husband on the porch of the life they'd built together, grateful beyond measure for the telegram that had shattered one future and delivered her to another. Some stories end with a wedding. Others, the true ones, begin there and continue through all the ordinary, extraordinary days that follow, through children and grandchildren, through loss and joy, through the simple, profound act of choosing to love and be loved in return. This was Clara's story. Not of a woman who found her prince and lived happily ever after, but of a woman who found herself, her family, her purpose, and her home in the most unexpected place. A woman who learned that sometimes the life you plan isn't nearly as beautiful as the life that finds you when those plans fall apart. And in a ranch house in Wyoming with 7 children and countless grandchildren to come, with a piano that was played every evening and a table that was never quite big enough for everyone who gathered around it. Clara Caldwell's story continued day by blessed day, forever and always home.